we see where we are? I have us finishing all of number 3. That gets us into question number 4, which are compatibility standards. The first amendment I have on that is in number 2, Code Next section. I think this was also Amendment 12, and I think this is yours.
Okay, so this is on my motion sheet. It's motion sheet number 5, and this is a focus on compatibility triggers that are the non-zoning ones, and so it's adding a little I and a 2I under it. So, and it's asking to include standards related to noise, uses, utility screening, side buffers, trash, loading, and pickup zones, as well as shielded lighting. And then the second one relates to green infrastructure from draft 3, tree preservation policy, tree canopy, to enhance walkability and curb heat island effect. So what I'm attempting to do with this one is, as we increase density along our corridors, there are a whole range of standards that relate to how the higher density areas intersect with the lower density areas, whether those are multifamily or single family. And so this just recognizes those and is saying that we need to bring back standards that relate to these. In other conversations, we've given examples. For example, the East Riverside Corridor addresses standards like these. This language is not suggesting any particular standard, nor is it referring to any any other example. It's just saying that we need to include these standards.
Okay, Councilmember Kitchen urges an amendment. Is there a second to the amendment? Councilmember Alter seconds that. Discussion? Councilmember Garza.
What do you mean include these standards?
Well, what I mean is that our land development code needs to have standards related to all of these things. And so I'm not attempting to prescribe what those standards should say. Our existing code has some standards related to these and some not. So I think all these subjects are probably addressed in our existing code, but there's improvements that need to be made to them. So, for example, I don't know if it's helpful, but to give you an example, trash, for example, folks in neighborhoods that I represent have had difficulties with the placement of dumpsters and the picking up of trash in the middle of the night, where dumpsters have been placed right next to single-family homes, which causes difficulty with sleeping. So this is just an acknowledgement that these kinds of subject matters we need to have standards for. And it's going to become even more important than it is now, the more we densify along corridors.
I guess
Further discussion?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead. Finish.
My concern is that we just went through the whole discussion about the prioritization and how we want to see. We didn't want to talk about specific things because we wanted to see how not prioritizing the non-zoning kind of things would affect our ability to add necessary housing in a housing crisis. And I'm also just a little concerned about I think people keep forgetting we're a big city now, and whether we want it, like it, I mean, there's noise. And I know exactly what you're talking about, dumpster. There's a business right next door to us that they come and pick up that dumpster at 3 o'clock in the morning sometimes, but we've lived with that. So those are just my concerns in adding another layer of standards or regulations to an already complicated process.
Well, maybe we could talk to staff,
Okay.
because there are standards in place right now, and they're part of, this is
Right.
part of.
And let
Oh, I'm
me
sorry.
get some other chance.
I'd just like to
Hang
I'd
on.
just like to make a motion for my amendment.
Okay, go
if I'm
ahead.
recognized. So my amendment is number 7, which I hope addresses some of what Councilmember or Mayor Pro Tem Garza brings up, which is just to add here, the revisions should consider providing options to do the following things. And I'll explain that if I get a second.
Is there a second to the Casar? Councilmember Garza?
So I think this goes to the intent of how Councilmember Kitchen actually described this, which is not prescribing exactly to which zones, exactly how it works, but instead to say these things are important things, provide us some options for how to do this well, because clearly for a really large development that is many stories tall, there might be the room for a side buffer, whereas something that is small, like what is on North Loop, which is commercial with a little bit of residential on top on a very small lot, having a side buffer may not make sense. And so instead of potentially implying that all of these things should be applied in compatibility on all of these corridors, instead provide us options for how we can incorporate this stuff, knowing that our primary goal is to get the housing and transportation goals hit.
Councilmember Flanagan?
I mentioned this last week, and I don't necessarily know that I need to make an amendment, but I have real issues with the way Draft 3 did no build and vegetative buffers. And I think there are still open questions on the impact those buffers have on our goals, especially when it comes to housing unit yield. Because one way to read this is that we want to maintain no build and vegetative buffers of some kind, but that they apply to commercial properties and not to the residential properties because we want to maximize residential yield. Another way to read it is apply vegetative buffers to residential properties in order to protect them from the thing that's next door. And I mean, there's a little bit of an agent of change question involved there for me. I don't know that needs to be changed given Councilmember Casar's amendment, because it says include options for, and the side buffers thing seems to address some of that. But in total, I'm going to be providing staff with all of my input that I gathered on reading Draft 3, which will include this stuff. But I want to be clear, at least for my part, that the sections of Draft 3 that talk about no build and vegetative buffers have issues.
I think I'm going to support, I had the same concerns I think that Councilmember Garza had, but I think that my concerns are met with the Casar amendment. We don't want to undo the conversation we had about priorities. We want to make sure that we stay focused on that. At the same time, I do want the staff to consider these things and see how we can accommodate them and provide for the concerns that are addressed. So I'm going to support Ann's deal with the Casar amendment. Councilmember Kitchen.
I'd like to suggest that the language say, on Casar's amendment, the revisions should provide options instead of consider providing options. And the difference I see is that,
That's fine.
okay,
Any objection to that? Hearing none, we'll make it provide option. With that change, are we okay with the kitchen as amended by Casar? Okay, then that's in. Yes?
Just one of those options would be that there would not be these standards. Okay.
Okay. All options. All right, that gets us then to, I think, gets us to D. I think, Councilmember Tovo. Number 5, I think.
I think I have a couple for this area. I think I have one that goes back.
Okay.
But I'll do 5 first. As a matter of fact, let's see. I have altered the language a bit, and I need to find that.
I think she has a different amendment than what you
I
have.
I rewrote it a little bit just to be a little more clear, and I'm going to need to find that.
Different than the yellow sheet you handed out here?
Yeah, I have another yellow sheet that's a little better. I'm going to need to come back to that.
We can do that.
I think I do have one.
The next one that I have on my
Item
chart
4.
is for F.
Yeah, item 4, which I distributed, is a new N at this section.
Okay, let's hold off on that. And let's go to F, kitchen.
Okay, so you want to go to question number 4, my number 6?
Yes, you're number 6.
Okay. I'm actually going to pass on F.
Okay, so we
I'll
won't
go
need
to
to
H and J if you'd like, but
And where do H and J go in?
it's the same place. It's question number 4.
Then go ahead and do those.
Pardon?
So you're passing on F. Okay, so we don't have to look at F. All right. H.
Okay, so H, okay, let me get to the right page here. So H and J are really the same concept. So if you'd like, I can speak to them
That's
at
fine.
the same time.
Go ahead.
So my concern is that we're being, I would like to be, I think it would be more prudent if we were less prescriptive. And so all I'm doing there is crossing out RM1 and above in H, and then in J, I'm crossing out R4 should be the least intense zone within a transition area. So, at the end of our time the other night, we did go through. There were a number of provisions that we went through that were in this section that we determined to take out because they were. I thought we were taking them out because they were more prescriptive than than needed. In other words, that they could inadvertently tie the staff's hands. And so we have an example that was given to us about the RM1 and the R4, and a suggestion that by including this, it was inadvertently being prescriptive in a way that we might not want. So I can take y'all through I posted the example. It was an example exhibit about RM1 zoning classifications.
Yeah, before you go
Do you
into
want
it,
me to
just
run into
real
that, or-
fast, hang on a second here. Let's take them in each one after the other.
Okay.
First, let's take up H, which is to strike RM1 and above. Is there a second to that? Councilmember Flanagan seconds that.
Okay.
Now go ahead, discuss that one.
Okay, so the example that was provided to us by someone that was pointing out that the RM1 zoning classification actually did not allow as many multifamily units as are on the ground now.
Okay, let me ask this question. Does anybody object to striking RM1 and above here? Councilmember, okay. You want to hear what Councilmember Harper-Madison's objection is?
I'm more than an objection. I'd like an explanation. I don't understand that.
Okay,
Thank you.
shall I go ahead?
Go ahead.
Okay, there's an exhibit that goes into some detail, but basically
Do I have the same exhibit?
well, it was posted, and I'm sorry, I probably didn't count it. I probably didn't pass it out. So it was an example that was provided to us, emailed to us. But basically, so for example, RM1 doesn't allow for as many multifamily units as are actually on the ground in some places. So, for example, RM1 does not allow more than 18 units per acre, whereas the example that was provided to us was actually of some multifamily housing in a particular area on Avenue A that already had over 18 units. So it was just an example that said that it's better, suggesting that it's better to give staff some flexibility in what zoning category they use to zone the multifamily areas and transition zones. So that was the intent there. So.
And I'm fine with this because when this was originally written, we had the RM1 included because that was the zone that didn't trigger.
Right.
But it doesn't necessarily have to be. So I'm fine with your amendment.
Okay.
Any objection to that amendment? Hearing none, that amendment's incorporated. Why don't you go then to J?
J is the same concept. R4 should be the least intense zone within a transition area. So again, the effort here is to allow the flexibility for staff to use the right zoning category. My thought is that this is too prescriptive.
Discussion. Councilmember Kassar.
I think that we want to provide clarity to people what is going to be in transition zones generally. And to me, R4 is that fourplex type thing. And so I think that it's important to just let people know that it's going from, lower level MF zones to fourplex type zones. And so I'd rather leave it in.
Can I speak?
Well, now, hang on a second. Let's see if other people want to speak as well. Kathy?
I think less prescriptive makes sense. I also just want to point out that if what we're saying is the least intensive missing middle that we're going to map in a transition zone is R4, we're not talking about draft 1 anymore. We're talking really about draft 1. I mean, this is much more intense than draft 3. So I think we should acknowledge that.
Further discussion? Councilmember Flanagan?
I'm fine with striking this because I think inherent in this question is how big the transition zone is, and so I don't even know what the least intense zone I want or that we might want in a transition zone. If we define them really narrowly, then the transition zone maybe ends with a 4-unit right. But if we define the transition zone long, then maybe it ends with a 2-unit right. I mean, I don't know, but I'm not ready to prescribe that, so I'm fine with striking this line.
Mayor.
Yes. Hang on a second. I think Councilmember Kitchen is next.
Yeah, I would just echo what my colleagues have said, what Councilmember Flanagan said too. I think we don't know exactly what we're going to see in these particular areas. We haven't mapped them yet, and we've given lots of direction to staff about how we want more density in these transition areas. So I think it's unnecessary and too prescriptive. So, I think it could end up with inadvertent issues, like Councilmember Flanagan gave us an example of.
Councilmember Garza?
I think this could be direction with like a qualifier of R4 should be the least intensive zone within a transition area. And then I don't know what something about staff. That's not saying it says it should be, and staff can, I think this provides us the option, the direction, staff, this is what we want, but if there are instances where this is not appropriate, let us know. I think this language as is still provides staff that option. It doesn't say must, it says should.
Councilmember Kassar?
My question for Councilmember Flanagan is, currently the document says the transition zone will be 2 to 5 lots deep. And so I'm just trying to set the expectation of within that short transition zone, R4, I think is what you're getting at the end. And then after that, you could do 3 units with the preservation according to this document. And so if the transition zone were longer, then I think you could have some R3, for example. But right now with just 2 to 5 lots in, I think we should be allowing at least fourplex, which is my intention here. I think to your point, if it's going to get longer, then I think we could allow things smaller than fourplex. But if it's only going to be 2 to 5, as it says in this document, I think we should give people the expectation that we mean on that 4th and 5th lot that it's fourplex. So R4 or fourplex would be my preference.
Councilmember Ellis?
I also think it's helpful. I recall the conversation about when we were talking about going up to 7 transition zones and us together kind of making that decision that if we're going to go back to 5 lots, that we're going to need to be a bit more prescriptive about what to do with that transition zone. And a lot of the discussion that I even heard a year ago was we need more density along corridors and we need to make better use out of our transition zones. And I think that's why it's important to leave it in.
In front of us is the Kitchen Amendment to J. Ann?
I'm trying to think of some language that could capture what Councilmember Garza had suggested, because I think that that's really what we're trying to get to. Because I'm not seeing it exactly here, but maybe it's something like R4 should be the least intense zone within a transition area, subject to staff's considerations of what's appropriate or something like that? Does that make sense, Councilman? Okay, so subject to staff's consideration of what's appropriate?
I think we can handle that.
Okay.
Would you mind?
Anybody object to adding at the end, keeping J in, but adding at the end, subject to staff's consideration of what's appropriate?
I have,
Councilmember Alter?
can we, at the very least, put fourplex next to R4? Because nobody but anybody on this dais is going to have any idea what that means. And I think
Okay.
it's clearer for folks
Okay.
what is intended by the majority.
And I'm going to just register, we don't need to take a formal vote, but I'm going to register my objection to that.
Okay. Is anybody objection to changing, substituting fourplex for R4? There's an objection to that.
Only because I agree with the intent Councilmember Alter laid out. I don't think fourplex is clear enough because it could be a triplex with an ADU. It's just 4 units.
4 units?
Yeah, which is my understanding of what R4 represented.
And to be clear, can we say 4 house scale units? That's what
Would be
R4
4 units within the house scale.
4 units within
House scale.
a house scale. 4 units within a house scale should be the least intense zone within a transition area, comma, subject to staff's consideration of what's appropriate. Councilmember Cassar.
And so this is where, if we want to say that, then my recollection also of R4 is that you could get more units with a bonus on top of those 4 for affordability. So if we want to start getting to the point where we explain that, or if staff just understands what we mean, we don't have to write that in. You just generally get it that when we say 4 units within a house scale, we're not saying don't include a density bonus if it works.
Right, you have to read this whole document in conjunction with each other. Any objection to that language? Hearing none, that language is in.
Mayor?
I'm sorry, hang
Mayor.
on a second. Councilmember Alter, thank you for raising your hand, then Councilmember Poole.
I wanted, if you're not going to put it to a vote, I wanted to register my objection to this as well.
We could put it to a vote if people want to raise a hand, but we have,
Let's do
let's
that.
put it to a vote. Those in favor of J, please raise your hand. Those opposed, it's Alter, Poole, and Tovo. The others voting aye. J is in with that language change.
I just wanted to
Go ahead.
make sure that I was clear, that I'm clear. So what you just voted for is that the least intensive zoning within the transition, which will be generally to 2 to 5, would be 4 units within a house scale with the possibility of a bonus on top of that.
No, there was more to it.
Affordability. But I mean in terms of,
That's correct.
but I mean, there was the caveat that the staff could do something different, but I just wanted to make sure that I'm not misspeaking that the intention is that.
Right. The transition area is an area in between the commercial activity and the normal single-family home that is less than the commercial on the corridor, but more than a single-family home.
And going generally 2 to 5, the least intensive that you're imagining is 4 units within the house scale with some discretion for staff to do something different and a possibility of a bonus on top.
That's
And
correct.
Mayor, and I assume a preservation bonus also applies here. So you could be looking at as many as 5 units if one of those existing units was preserved.
If people want to preserve the existing home, that's correct. Councilmember Poole.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that we've really changed the attention of where Ann Kitchen, Councilmember Kitchen was going with her original request, simply to remove that. So I'm definitely opposed to, I supported what Councilmember Kitchen was going for with her amendment, but the
And
way
your
this has
objection
been
was
changed.
noted.
Thank you.
Okay, let's look at the next item. Next thing I'm seeing here is,
Mayor, I think I've got one. My
Okay.
motion sheet 3 is down here in, I think that's L. at the bottom of the same page that we're on, page 9.
Okay.
And it's the final bullet on the page. It says drainage considerations, and this is the city manager shall also use the following conditions as appropriate when mapping transition areas. And I simply wanted to add 2 words, and flooding, to drainage and flooding considerations. And that allows
Okay.
us to have a full picture of what's
Does anybody have
happening.
any objection to adding the words "and flooding"? No objection, that's added.
Thank you.
Yep.
So,
Okay. Ann?
I have another, it's really a question related to E when you're ready for it.
Okay. Back up to E. Okay.
You want me to go ahead?
Go back up to E, yes.
Okay, so my question on E is, I have two questions on E, and and it relates to the first question. Well, actually, both questions relate to little 4. And I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to have the map put up that was in backup. So if staff could put up the map of the street grid that was in backup, because that'll help me with my second part of my question on this. So can someone take care of that?
Which map?
It was posted, and it's the map of it's a map of the transition zone areas. So
Are you talking about the the map that had been on Greg's thing?
it was. I don't know who did it. I know it's not. It's posted to backup, not to council
Okay.
message board. So, but let me ask my question here. So, okay. So it says located in a higher opportunity area, and I'm asking, shouldn't that just be high opportunity area? When you look at the Enterprise Opportunity 360 Index, it doesn't use the term higher opportunity area. It uses the term high opportunity area. So my assumption is that that's what was meant there, but I just want to double check. And if so, could we make that change?
In Roman numeral
4.
lowercase 4, it says located in a higher opportunity area. The question is, should it say located in a high opportunity
Yeah,
area?
I'm not finding any document that.
Does anybody have any objection to striking ER? Councilmember Cassar?
I have no objection. I just want to double check. I think the way we got to the word higher, and look at the housing staff just to make sure I get a nod, is that our strategic housing blueprint and other documents used a different map that went from moderate to high. So we would describe that as higher. But then my understanding is that now we use this index as described by Councilmember Kitchen that just uses high and emerging and not high. Is that right?
Erica Lake, Neighborhood Housing. Yes, and I think my only question would be, is the idea that there are different distinctions within the way Opportunity 360 defines opportunity, and they could be broken, let's say they could be broken into 4 categories. So the question for me would be, are you wanting to focus on the 2 of the higher than low, or just the one that is actually specifically defined as high?
The map we have in front of us now has high, emerging, and then none, which is 3 categories. What is the 4th category? Do you know?
I was just saying if there were 4. So I think my question is, are you wanting to include both high and emerging, or just high? The emerging would obviously include a wider area of the city.
I think it's high.
I think so too.
High. Any objection to striking the ER? Seeing none, it's high. Okay? Taking out the ER.
Okay. So then my second question, if you want to put that map back up there. My second question, and this is distances from corridors and centers, 1/4 mile and 1/2 mile, which actually I know that we're not doing transition zones within 1/4 or 1/2 mile, but this map happens to, well, maybe I'm wanting to understand.
Which section are you in now?
Yeah, I'm trying to think which is the right map. I still have questions on number 4. It's the same line that I'm asking questions about.
Okay.
I'm wanting to understand how this would be mapped. Because it talks in terms of, generally speaking, when we're talking about transition areas, we're mapping off of a street. So what does this mean? Because this says some or all of the following criteria. So I'm just wanting to understand what is meant and how would you map a high opportunity area?
Can you make your question a little more specific, because I don't want to answer the wrong question.
Okay, because so I see 2 possibilities. So actually,
They're all off of a transit priority network or an activity center or corridor.
okay.
So that always gives them 1.
That's what I
It
wanted
always
to
makes them at
clarify.
least tier 1, and then as they hit more criteria, then they would
Okay.
increase.
Okay, so that answers my question. So to map
guessed
a high opportunity area, they have to be off of a transit priority network or an Imagine Austin Center or corridor. Is that right?
That's right. And then it being high opportunity means likely more length and more missing middle up to 5 lots under this regime than if it weren't in a high opportunity area.
The reason I'm asking that is because we have said that one of our goals was to have missing middle housing and affordable housing all over the city.
Correct.
And if you look at the map of the high opportunity areas in Austin, and you compare that to a map of the transit priority areas and the activity corridors, there's some significant parts of town that are not included that are high opportunity areas. And I just wanted to understand if that is the intention.
Mayor, can I keep going?
Yes.
I mean, I would be happy and fine with adding more transition areas in high opportunity areas where there isn't a corridor or transit priority network. I just started from the place where we saw from many of the work sessions that the transition areas would come off of those. But if there were ideas for adding more that had broad consensus, I would certainly be supportive. Basically, we built that criteria off of a starting place of transit priority and corridor, if that makes sense, and center.
Okay, so could I ask another question?
And let's give Mr. Flanagan a chance
Okay.
to jump in.
Okay.
So I just wanted to note something that I brought up on Thursday is that some of these centers are not so precisely defined that we can really say quarter mile or half mile from them. The 2 regional centers in District 6, for example, are significantly larger than the circles that appear on this map. Robinson Ranch especially already has ginormous entitlements. That area would be much, much larger, and the Lakeline Center would be much larger than the circle that's up there too. So I just want to make sure we're not losing that part of the thread.
And again, I think it's probably important to note again that this is not drafting the ordinance, so we don't have to be exact. We're trying to give direction generally to staff, and they'll come back with something that then the entire community will have months to address and say it doesn't work here, it works here, and don't do this and do that kind of thing. Councilmember Alter.
I wanted to ask staff, this is the first I've heard that there's 2 different measures for high opportunity. And I know that the map that was put in backup is not the map that I thought we'd landed on with Code Next. So it doesn't take half of my district is preserve and greenbelts and parks, and none of that is out of there. And we've had many, many conversations about how when you just slap it over the whole thing, it doesn't actually represent the developable area. And now I'm also hearing that there's 2 different maps, if I understood correctly.
So I think you're talking about, so let me make sure I understand. So you're talking about this map that's being shown now versus the
No,
map?
I'm going back to the high opportunity map, as I might have misunderstood something that was said, but I got the impression that there was one way that we were that this document had mapped from a particular tool, Envision, whatever, I don't know what that's called, and then that in the strategic housing implementation blueprint, you were using a different measure. And so I wanted to understand the difference, first of all.
Sure. So the City of Austin used to use the Kirwan Opportunity Index. But the data in that has not been updated for numerous years, and we didn't have any way to update it on a regular basis. And so we have switched to using Opportunity 360, which is more easily updated, and so that was what was used for the housing blueprint implementation plan.
And that's the same thing that's on this map. Is that correct?
I think so. I haven't seen that.
Here.
The answer is yes.
Okay. And then my second, it's more of a comment, and I don't know that we have to put it in this direction because you're going to have to do it anyway. But as you're looking at high opportunity, no matter how you're measuring it, for District 10, we have preserves and we have parks. We have critical water quality zones and things that take up a huge portion of the map, and those need to be accounted for so that the high opportunity doesn't apply, or you're going to get very misleading results. And I would ask that the next time you put up a high opportunity map that you take those areas out, because it's not an accurate assessment of what we have to work with moving forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Kitchen.
And yes, I don't, there are areas to the west that include environmental features and preserves and things that wouldn't be appropriate for transition zones. But the reason I'm pointing this out is because to the extent that we do not consider, and this is not really the right map, and it's also should be turned this way. So I think I'd rather put up this high opportunity map if someone could put this up. I just want us to understand that in areas of the Southwest, for example, and to a lesser degree the Northwest, we are not, there may be areas that we're not taking advantage of additional density. And I think that to the extent that we do not consider the whole city with regard to high opportunity areas, we are missing part of our goal. So that's why I wanted to ask the question. It was also confusing to me because I wasn't certain what the intent was. So Councilmember Flanagan, I see that you already have a lot of transit things going in the Northwest, so the map extends over. I don't know enough about your district about whether there are areas that would be appropriate or not. So you would know that better than I would.
If I might, one of the challenges for District 6 is the Robinson Ranch is a big part of that, and it's already got its full entitlements, but its challenges of development are fairly unique. And most of the higher opportunity area is located within centers, regional centers, so a lot of that is captured. The real challenge is more to what Councilmember Alter pointed is as you get down 620, it's the northern half of preserves, just like her preserves in District 10. And so those areas become really challenging as you get down onto the 2222 corridor in terms of just access to transit and other services. But the 183 corridor is pretty substantially either in those corridors, in centers, or ETJ. I've got a lot of weird holes in there that won't get zoning at all and won't count towards our goals, but because there is ETJ, it will get redeveloped because there are no county zoning controls. So, as a region, there will be more housing, inevitably.
Okay.
What about the Southwest?
I think the staff is going to evaluate this, as they always do, in ways that fully consider our watershed protections and where we are able to do things. I would welcome, I don't know if we need to amend the language, but give them the opportunity to see that if there are places that are typically underserved by denser housing that could be available, I would be more than happy to look at those opportunities.
Okay, well then I think we just need some clarity that we are going to consider transition areas in all the high opportunity areas, subject, of course, to the environmental concerns that have been raised, which includes preserves, as far as I'm concerned.
Does anyone want to make an amendment? think Kathy's handed out her Amendment 5. She's ready for that.
Can
Well,
we call that
well-
missing middle? It's just very confusing to then all of a sudden have a transition area that's not off a corridor. I'm just trying to understand it, but like talking about it as if it's a transition zone when there's no corridor or center, it helps to create confusion that
Well, I don't know
is
how to address it.
problematic.
I don't know how to address it, so I don't know if Councilmember Kassar had a suggestion, or maybe we just use open-ended language that says that the staff should consider where it's appropriate, taking into account environmental concerns and that sort of thing. I just think we're putting, frankly, we're putting so much pressure on the central city, and we have said that our goal is high opportunity areas and all throughout the city, that we should acknowledge that and give some staff some direction one way or the other. So I think that, perhaps there's another sentence or two that needs to be added here.
Can I respond to that?
Yes.
I would be open to that. I don't know what the appropriate amended language would be, but I just wanted to take a moment to identify that I live in a multi-type of housing situation in an Imagine Austin growth corridor that is right on the Greenbelt, and I think our staff has done a lovely job of making sure that that is an opportunity for me, and I think that they would do that for other people as well.
That's great. I think that's good. I just think that we should be clear. So,
I could work on typing something up, but maybe we take up another amendment as we type something and
Okay,
so we
let's
can
come
have
back to
something
that then. Councilmember Tovo? You want to do your...
Sure. This is just a slightly reworded version of the amendment that I distributed last week on the dais and posted on the message board. And this is would go on page 10. No, sorry. On page 8, where we're talking about the zoning map. And it would suggest to the staff that one exception to mapping the transition zone would be in instances where market affordable and/or missing middle housing is adjacent or proximate to a property fronting a corridor or according to specific context-sensitive general criteria. So we had talked about that last time, where we don't want to be mapping transition zone. We don't want to be mapping missing middle zones on top of existing missing middle housing, and thus incentivizing the demolition and redevelopment of those tracts.
Yeah.
This is revised
Again,
amendment
is there a
5.
second? There's a revised amendment number 5. Councilmember Tovo, is there a second to this?
I'll second it.
No second?
Yeah.
Councilmember Poole? Seconds. Kathy, you want to address it?
So there's a question about where we are in the document. It is on page 8, and there's an A5 there. I slightly reworded the language, and that's why I've distributed a revised Amendment 5 here on the dais.
So in question 4, 3, zoning map, subsection D begins the lots adjacent to parcels fronting on activity corridor won't trigger compatibility, goes on. And you're adding, this amendment is it to add, then there's an
Yeah, there was language
I-
from this. There was language in the original draft that was something like, "Such mapping of this minimal transition zone may not occur in some situations if there's criteria provided by council." So I'm suggesting some criteria in cases where we already have existing missing middle housing or market affordable housing.
Got it.
We would not provide a rezoning on top of that.
So this is to replace subsection D in that section.
DI.
Is that correct?
No, it's adding to it.
It's the I under subsection D.
That's right.
Mayor.
Yes.
So
Hang on. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to explain why I'm opposed to this amendment, because I think we already have covered the protecting existing affordable multifamily with our prior vote. And what I think this could unintentionally do is then just not map transition zones in these areas and also not unlock compatibility on the corridor. So I think we already have covered that we're not going to upzone affordable missing middle. So we should go ahead and map the transition zones, and then if there's affordable multifamily, you already have your direction on how to treat those individual parcels, but not the whole zone.
May I respond, please?
Yes, and then
I think
Mr.
there's a
Flanagan.
difference between multifamily properties and missing middle. I mean, what we've talked about as missing middle is anything from a fourplex to a twoplex to others. So I guess, can you help me understand why would we want to incentivize the redevelopment of existing missing middle housing? How would that lead to a more affordable outcome for people who need that housing in the future? I mean, the street I showed you the other day has existing missing middle housing. If we place a zoning category on there that is higher than what is currently there, we're incentivizing the redevelopment of that housing. What benefits do we have there? We have maybe more units at a much higher cost.
I think the question was for me, but I'm happy to let other people.
Go ahead and answer that, and then Mr. Flanagan.
I think that if it is not existing affordable multifamily, but it is a duplex, it will likely become very expensive in the near-term future. Having a fourplex there that has also affordable units as part of a bonus program, I think locks in long-term affordability, and I think the addition of new housing slows the gentrification and development pressures beyond that. And so if it isn't a market rate affordable multifamily, then I think, and it falls within the transition zone, then I think the transition zone should apply.
Mr. Flanagan.
So I'm not in support of this, one, because it adds the phrase "this minimal transition zone," which I can't find elsewhere in this section. I see references to minimize the impact of compatibility, but I think we're injecting something about the size of the transition zone. And I think I heard
I
Councilmember
think that's in the
Turbo.
original language. I mean, I can double check, but I think that was in the original text.
Well, then I object to it.
It is in the original text.
There's this whole document is being amended, so I
Okay.
don't like that phrase. But did you say that you didn't think we should zone existing missing middle housing, a missing middle housing zone?
I don't think we should upzone it, no. I think that it should match what is the zoning. In areas where we have missing middle housing, I think we should identify a zoning category that matches what is on the ground.
Okay,
So in
so
the
I was hearing
example
you
I
wrong
gave you,
then.
and I think that you said, you offered as an example the other day of a gap where the zoning doesn't match what you're seeing in some areas where there are, I think you had offered the suggestion where there are 2 units, or example where there are 2 units, but the zoning doesn't necessarily allow for that, and I can't remember why. I think it was an area that came in.
It's literally the duplex I live in is zoned SF2.
Right.
you would
So
be
I'm
able
not
to build it there,
suggesting, I'm suggesting making the zoning match the conditions on the
Okay.
ground.
Then I was misunderstanding that second part of your.
Yeah, so, in the example I offered the other day, which I just gave you half a street, but, I wish I had the numbers and probably do somewhere in my notes to show you by the time you get, there are about 17 tracks on that street. By the time you get 5 in from this way and 5 in from this way, you have about 5 in the middle. And the number of missing middle housing units that would be potentially redeveloped, if there's not a consideration for what's already on the ground, I think as I mentioned before, I think by the time those are redeveloped, you may have more units. They're going to be serving people with higher income.
Wouldn't that upzone have to have with it, though, affordability associated with it in those areas? In order to be able to get, we've said
We have language in there now that says that those will be tied to an affordable housing component if it's economically feasible.
Correct.
Which I think allows I think we'll have to see when that comes back. My guess is that we're going to hear in certain cases it's not economically feasible, and then we've lost out. I mean, without a consideration of what missing middle we have and a real significant attempt to preserve it, I think this just amounts to a redevelopment.
And I hear that. I disagree because I think it is the only tool we have to plant permanent affordability. And what is affordable there today, as we're seeing all over the city, unless we act, will not be affordable in the future. But the ability to be able to give an additional entitlement tied to affordability gives us the opportunity to plant permanent affordability. And I wish we had been doing that in more places for a much longer period of time.
Then I think we should be very clear that those entitlements will be offered if there is an affordable component. End of story. I mean, the language we have right now is very vague on that topic.
Right,
and so I think we should revisit it then and take out if economically feasible and say they can be calibrated for economic feasibility. But if there is an increase of entitlements, it will be accompanied by an affordable housing commitment.
I hear that, and I think that it's going to be an important conversation for us to have when we start seeing what comes back. Further discussion. Councilmember Alter.
So I just wanted to clarify, as I understood Councilmember Kassar's argument was that we already have a clause that says if it's market affordable multifamily housing that we wouldn't upzone it. So that if I have an instance, and I have one in my head in my district that's off a corridor in a highly desirable area, that's one lot in from the corridor and is a 12-unit multifamily that I don't know how much it is, but it looks like a market rate. It's not a fancy apartment complex and the units are small, that then there wouldn't be upzoning of that because of that criteria, even if it's in the transition zone, what lot in. Is that staff's understanding of that?
Yes, that in situations like that, upzoning would not occur without the accompaniment of a bonus program.
But a bonus program that takes 12 units and then makes it 20 units, but only 2 of them are affordable, doesn't replace 16 affordable units. So that just,
I think he's saying that out of context. I think he's saying that out of context, out of the amendment that we passed earlier. I think the amendment we passed earlier said if it is market rate affordable multifamily housing, don't upzone it. What this says though is still unlock compatibility on the corridor and still map a transition zone, but take this criteria into effect.
I didn't mean that it wouldn't unlock the compatibility.
Exactly.
I just meant I'm concerned about what happens to that. I think the compatibility is unlocked because that's already there. But
and I think the reason that I oppose the amendment is because the amendment says don't map the transition zone at all. It says do not map a transition zone if there is affordable multifamily or missing middle in it, and so that seems to me to be duplicative while killing the rest of the transition zone.
Councilmember Tobel.
I think it depends on how we're defining multifamily. I mean, if by multifamily we're talking about the fourplex I showed the other day, then we have no argument. If by multifamily the staff are going to define it only as 16 units, that helps out on 1 or 2 of the tracks that I was showing, but it certainly doesn't help the triplex. So, again, I think it amounts to who we're trying to build missing middle housing for.
may I ask one clarifying
Yes, Councilmember
question?
Alter.
So, Mr. Kassar, were you objecting because you thought it meant like the whole block couldn't be mapped minimally? Because it seems like Councilmember Tovo's talking about the lot that has it on it, and it seemed like you were interpreting, well, then the whole block wouldn't get, if it was a block, let's say. Or am I just trying to read too much into this at this hour?
Why don't you go ahead and offer that?
I was just saying, I think in the end, my concerns are covered by the other line that we passed, and so I just think that we've addressed multifamily, and then if we start getting to specifically what's the right number of units, I feel comfortable having the staff figure out how to balance all of those different questions and needs.
Mayor, I could
we
offer.
have in front of us. Go ahead.
I could offer, if the concern is, I mean, I heard a variety of concerns, some of which I just can't accommodate, but some such mapping of the transition zone should be responsive to existing conditions, existing situations, including instances where market affordable, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's making it clear that that should be a criteria, that the mapping should take into consideration existing missing middle that's on the ground. So I hope you find that to be responsive.
Could you read that again?
Such mapping of the transition zone, or mapping of the transition zone, again, I think we're preserving earlier language that doesn't need to be here anymore. Mapping of the transition zone should respond to existing situations, including instances where market affordable and/or missing middle housing is adjacent or proximate to a property fronting a quarter or according to specific context-sensitive general criteria.
That seems fine with me, but I'm willing to hear people's concerns out.
What did you say, Kathy? I'm sorry.
Sure. Mapping the transition zone should be responsive to existing situations, including instances where market affordable and/or missing middle housing is adjacent or proximate to a property fronting a quarter or to specific context-sensitive general criteria. I think it really should be and to.
But the concept that we're talking here, just to be clear, because I had the same concern that I think Councilmember Alter was addressing. We're not talking about the whole transition zone. We're talking about the individual lot on which there is market affordable or missing middle housing.
Yes.
And was that included in your amendment?
I mean, I think we can provide that as part of the direction, that's in sync with what I'm saying.
And that makes sense to me because off of Cesar Chavez, you've got commercial, then you have some smaller residential, then you have bigger multifamily. So obviously the transition zone has to take into account that you're not mapping missing middle where Santa Rita Courts is, right? And so, of course, I think it makes sense to me that the staff has to look at what's on the ground as they map it out because it's not going to work the same in all situations.
I think it's the looking at what's on the ground that is really key.
So
and also being attentive to the fact that sometimes the zoning doesn't match what's on the ground.
So within a transition zone, staff should look at what's on the ground for an individual lot, or staff can look on the ground to see what's happening with an individual lot.
Yeah, I think.
And then the balance of the language.
Could I suggest something?
Uh-huh.
I think Councilmember Tovo's language might be more specific, but I can get to yours. So it's mapping of lots within a transition zone should be responsive to existing situations, and then you go on, including instances, and you go on from there. But that gets your lot concerned. So it's mapping of lots within a transition zone.
It's a transition area, by the way.
Transition area, sorry.
Should be, okay. Should be responsive to instances where market affordable, is that what we're saying?
No, should be responsive
Responsive
to
to-
existing situations, including instances where.
Situations. Including where?
Including instances where. And then the rest of it, you just keep the rest of it.
Okay. Mapping of lots within a transition area should be responsive to existing situations, including instances where. Okay, and I'll be keying off the word of mapping of lots,
Yeah.
as opposed to mapping of the transition
Right,
area.
right, mhm.
Mapping of lots within the transition area.
Right.
Are people okay with that change as made? Any objection? Yes.
Got to figure out a situation where you can see me better.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have lots of concerns here, including questions about So this existing missing middle, I won't speculate, but I suspect Hyde Park would be included in this as an example.
I mean, if that's a question for me, most of my neighborhoods have a fair amount of missing middle, as some of the other Central Austin neighborhoods have.
It was a question for you, and in fact, it was a question, and it was equal parts a statement, because what I feel like is we're doing that thing where we do preservation in lieu of, and I think the in lieu of is more housing, both market rate and affordable, and if we have a code currently, which if there's no change, I'm assuming it would adhere closely to the code we already have. If we already have a code currently that doesn't support our goals around housing and transit, I don't see the point in keeping it like it is. It doesn't make sense to me. I also have some questions about if we forego mapping the transition zones, doesn't that essentially mean that we are just giving up on the progress with transit networks? I mean, I have lots of questions and concerns around this whole language and proposition here. I don't think it gets us any closer to what it is that we're aiming to do, and I certainly don't think that keeping what's already there in a way that there's no... So what it sounds like to me is we're going to make some exceptions for certain neighborhoods, and that frightens me a lot.
Mayor, can I speak to that?
Yes, Councilmember Kitchen.
Okay, a couple of things. We wanted to make sure we were talking about lots, not the whole transition zone. So it wouldn't be a matter of not transition zones. So that's just one piece. The other thing is that there's a lot of neighborhoods where you already have missing middle along the corridors, and so this is just saying that the staff should be responsive to what's on the ground. It doesn't tell them one way or the other whether they have to, whether they have to map or not. So, for example, in the Zilker neighborhood, I've got a map I'm happy to show you where all along Lamar, we are very deep into the neighborhood. We already have multifamily housing in multiple places.
And missing middle aren't the same thing.
Okay, so I've got pictures. I can show you missing middle. I'll be more precise. I've got pictures of missing middle. We have missing middle in Zilker. And we've got it, it's half mile in, a quarter mile in from the corridor into the neighborhood. And so this is just saying, all this is saying is that when the staff maps, they've got to consider what's on the ground, that's all. So
I truly appreciate you trying to make this more clear for me, but it doesn't assuage my fears about some neighborhoods having one level of expectation for how they will contribute to our addressing our housing shortage and others not. And that's my concern. And even with what you've offered and provided by way of the changes in the text, my fears haven't changed. I still think what's underneath the surface here is implicating that there will be a different set of expectations depending upon which neighborhood you're in.
I don't understand that. I don't understand what you're saying.
So as I look at this,
Fair.
I understand I'm going to take a turn and then I'll come to you. I think I'm trying to play through. We're not talking about the overall transition area. We're talking about isolated lots. And there are certain isolated lots that we're saying we also want to protect. So now we're in one of these situations where we have conflicting things we both want and they conflict with one another. And I'm trying to figure out how to narrow down that conflict and make the allowance. This applies to those individual lots where there's missing middle housing. We've discussed that. So it would only be where there's missing middle housing. But we also have market affordable. Is market affordable and or missing middle housing meaning market affordable housing and missing middle housing, or are we talking about market affordable missing middle housing?
It was a and or. They can be co-occurring or not. And by the way, I'll just say, I know we all have different policy positions. I'm going to continue to strive to have, I'm just going to simply say, because I don't want to get into a real involved argument here, I'll just simply say I don't agree with the characterization of my amendment that was made.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Mayor,
Yes.
I also had concerns just about, it seems vague, and I don't think it's intentionally that way, but if we made it market affordable missing middle, then I think, and removing the and or, then I think it could help with preserving existing missing middle housing, but not letting market affordable lend itself to other types of housing in that way. I don't know if that's something you'd consider.
I think that's fine. Thank you for that suggestion.
Okay, so we'll take out and or, and we'll just say we're market affordable missing middle housing. So mapping of lots within a transition area should be responsive to existing situations, including instances where market affordable missing middle housing is adjacent or proximate to a property fronting a corridor, or according to specific context-sensitive general criteria. Any objection to that amendment being added that way?
No.
Hearing none, that's going to be added that way. Councilmember Alter?
I just wanted to clarify at least that with missing middle, and going back to the discussion we had at work session, we were trying to understand what a multiplex equals, and looking at some of the zoning categories that are available to us and that we consider missing middle. Some of them have, 24 units per acre. And so to me, a multiplex that has 24 units or 12 units is multifamily. You can call it missing middle if that falls in our definition, but it is multifamily. And, there are market affordable properties in high opportunity areas that we do have to be careful about, which is why I appreciated some of the changes that we added earlier. And those will simply disappear if we don't be careful about how we map them, and there won't be market affordable in those areas.
Back on Amendment 5, I don't understand the last very phrase. I understand if it says fronting a corridor, period. I don't know what or according to specific context-sensitive general criteria is in that context. Do we need those 8 words, 7 words?
Mayor, I think those were left over from the old one saying, ask, because the original language said, and look at the other.
Yeah, so I'm
following
thinking they need to come out. 'Cause
No,
they
I
don't
don't.
apply any longer.
I would disagree. We kept this section in deliberately last time, and I think that we should continue to keep this section.
We could do that if we keep in the next line as well. Such latter criteria would need to be provided by council.
That's fine with me.
And right now in this exercise, you're not being provided any, so you would have to then use what's here, and anything else you may be provided over the next day or tonight. But until there's nothing, unless the council provides you something.
There are some in later parts of this.
In the document.
Yeah, in the document, but you're right.
All right.
Anything that's not in the document so far would need to be
We
provided.
could just change it to criteria in this document.
Yeah.
Well,
Because right now it's kind of
And
mysterious.
specific context-sensitive general criteria in this document. Because if it's not in this document, if we don't put something like that, or say identified by council, we have 7 words that refer to something now that isn't anything.
Right. I would just suggest we keep such criteria, if any, would need to be provided by council. So that just leaves it open if council wants to provide more language later, and then it would still apply to what's in this document at the moment.
Okay, so we could take out according to, or specific context-sensitive general criteria provided by council.
Yeah, that would work.
Okay. Any objection to that? So this thing, DI, reads, mapping of lots within a transition area should be responsive to existing situations, including instances where market affordable missing middle housing is adjacent or proximate to property fronting a corridor, or specific context-sensitive general criteria provided by council. And thus far, this is the criteria you've been given.
There's
Okay,
other
any
language
other-
in this document.
I understand, we just haven't gotten there yet, right? We can certainly provide more. That's why I said so far. All right, so I think we're okay with this one. Then let's move to the next thing that we have. I think we're still in number 4. Let's see, is there anything left in number 4?
Mayor.
Okay, I'm sorry?
So as I had said a little bit earlier, when Councilmember Tovo rightly brought up that there are some transit priority networks where it's not a corridor, and she mentioned that there could be concern that those are treated the same as a corridor. My response was, on this map, there was a line that said we should treat them differently. Some people's faces looked like they don't want to include this map, and the shaking of heads confirms that, then that is fine, I won't. But I will hand out the line on that map that I think makes good sense. That way folks don't have a concern that I don't think any of us intend, which is if the transition area is not on an Imagine Austin corridor, but is actually on a residential transit priority network street, then the street-facing lot should, I handed one out that says the word should begin with missing middle zoning rather than corridor zoning, and I meant actually the street-facing lot should be zoned missing middle zoning rather than corridor zoning.
Can I get oriented in our document what page?
Hang on a second. Let's get
Where are
the
we?
thing handed out to each other.
It would.
So people can follow the language that you handed out. Okay. So we're still in the same section. We're up with F.
And if I can explain the intent here. Well, then it would be the next section if there already is an F.
So this is getting added at the end. This is an additional thing. So this would be like N or something.
Exactly. And the idea here.
Okay, instead of F, this would be N or whatever the appropriate letter is. What? It'll change as we go through. We've been adding some. So we'll say to the scrivener whatever the appropriate letter is. This is another thing added.
And,
Now, go ahead.
and the idea here is when we map a transition zone on I'll pick 2 places in my district. On North Lamar, which is an activity corridor, that is going to have this mixed use and commercial zoning on Lamar, and then the transition zone will be missing middle and residential. However, on Duval, the northern portion of Duval is in my district. That is an entirely residential, not a corridor street, and it's not an Imagine Austin activity corridor. So we want to make it really clear that we're not going to map activity corridor type zoning on a entirely residential street. We're going to map missing middle in that location.
Is there any objection to
And I
this?
think that that's always been the intention, but then when I heard that there might be some concern or question about it, I just wanted to make it very clear.
Okay. Is there any objection to this section? Yes, Councilmember Kitchen, then Councilmember Harper Madison. Kitchen.
I don't have an objection, but I have a question. So are you thinking that this addresses the earlier conversation we had about high opportunity areas, or is this a different thing?
This is different. On high
Okay.
opportunity, I'm still passing something back and forth by
Okay.
staff to make sure it works.
Okay.
Okay. We okay with this one, Councilmember Harper Madison? Did
It
you want to
wasn't
say-
this one, and seriously, we need a better system because I was trying to object to the last one, and you didn't acknowledge me, and we moved on and didn't take a vote.
Call.
And I had an objection, so.
Well, we can go
I
back.
want to make sure to be,
We can go back if there's an objection that you want to make.
I expressed my objection, but yes, there was an objection for me to the last item.
Okay. I'll
in
try to
which
pay
case-
better attention. You could call out my
I
name.
need a flag or
and we can go
something.
back.
Yes, I'd like to go on the record as objecting that item number D that we were just on before we moved on to Councilmember Kassar's item, in which case.
Okay. So let's go back to D in just a second. Is everybody okay with what we have here with N, or this new one that Kassar just had? Yes, Ms. Flanagan?
Do we have a definition of residential in terms of on a residential transit priority network street?
No, I think we're just asking staff to look at transit priority network, which we do have a definition of, and just
Yeah.
see if it looks like a residential street.
And I think the reasoning being, so again, I'll just use examples in my district. Metric in my district is transit priority network, but not
It's very
a
industrial.
corridor,
Yeah.
but it is not a residential
Yeah.
road. And so again, I'm just trying to, I think that this is intuitive in what staff would do anyway, but I want to put it on paper so that way anybody that has concerns recognizes that we're going to map Lamar different than I would map Duval, Metric different than I would map Berkman.
And what I liked about that original grid that you had put together was that not all corridors and transition zones are the same. And
this
staff's
is
gonna
making
figure
that
out.
extremely
Yeah.
clear.
Okay, this one is in. Councilmember Harper Madison, did you want to go back to an earlier one we did with?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't need to add any commentary to my objection, though. I think I was pretty clear.
Okay. Do you want us to vote on the D
Yes.
issue? Okay. Let's vote on D. D.I. Mapping of lots within a transition area should be responsive to existing situation, including instances where a market affordable missing middle housing is adjacent or proximate to property along a property fronting a corridor. Specific context-sensitive general criteria and specific, in comma, and specific context-sensitive general criteria provided by council. Those in favor of that amendment, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Mr. Flanagan, Councilmembers Harper Madison, and the Mayor Pro Tem voting no. That passes 8-3. Okay. Anything else here in this section 4 that people want to raise? Councilmember Kitchen.
Okay, this is on my motion sheet, page 3. And it says K. I'm not sure if that's still K, but this is, I'm just adding a sentence. The sentence that we have already in the document is, staff will provide a projection of how much missing middle housing capacity the mapping of transition areas consistent with these guidelines will provide. It goes on to there. So I'm just adding a sentence. The projection should include an accounting of existing missing middle housing to inform the overall numbers of missing middle housing provided in different areas around the city.
Councilmember Kitchen moves what is here K. Is there a second to that amendment? Councilmember Poole seconds that. Discussion.
Which one is it?
Mayor, maybe I'm a little off here, but it sounds like the conversation that we had where we were talking about housing blueprint goals and missing middle earlier about kind of that new versus existing number. So I don't know if that seems like we already had this conversation or if you're seeing something different.
Do you want me to speak to that?
Let's get Mr. Flanagan first, and we'll come to you.
Yeah, I had the same thought, and actually, without remembering exactly how we solved it the last time, this is, I think, almost even more elegant in addressing it. So I think this sounds fine.
I think in the last one we voted not to include it. All right.
No, we included it, but
What
we
was-
reworded it. So this is different.
What was the one that we had?
The language is different.
Okay. Do you remember which
So-
one that was?
Oh, you're right. I'm confused as to what we did before, but this is in a different section.
It is in a different section. I just, for the record, though, I think we did not pass it before, so I don't think there is competing language.
Right, okay.
So this is new language. We didn't pass anything before. Continuing on.
Okay, so I think it's important to read it in the context of the whole paragraph, because the paragraph says staff will provide a projection of how much, so we're asking staff to tell us how much missing middle housing capacity we're going to have. and how effectively that enables us to achieve our goals. So it's simply saying the projection should include an accounting of existing missing middle housing to inform the overall numbers of missing middle housing provided. So it's just giving us information about our total missing middle housing. I don't know, I can't understand why we wouldn't want to have that information. It's not saying anything about goals, which was the problem with the previous one.
I think the only concern is, I think information is good, not only with how much missing middle housing we have, but how much market housing we have, how much subsidized housing we have. I think the information will be real good. It's not a projection because it's not projecting anything. It's just, it's counting what already exists. And I think the information is good. The only question for me is whether it goes into this direction. Separately, asking for an inventory of different housing types we have in the city makes sense to me. I'm concerned about I'm just concerned that it wraps people into the conversation we had earlier. But I could be alone in that.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, Councilmember Harper Madison.
I have similar concerns in that I don't want us to ascertain what our stock is, or I don't want the exercise of us ascertaining what our current stock is to influence what our goals look like moving forward. So I would hate to see a neighborhood that has missing middle not get more. I wouldn't want it to negatively influence how we continue to create the stock we're so desperately short on.
Kitchen Amendment K is in front of us. Any further discussion before we vote? Councilmember Kitchen?
Yeah, I hear your concern, and that's not the intention. It says nothing about counting, subtracting it, or adding it, or anything. It's just information. So I think it's important for us to know.
Take a vote. Those in favor of kitchen motion sheet K, please raise your hand. Were you okay? Flanagan, Alter, Kitchen, Tovo, and Poole. Those opposed, please raise your hand. It's the balance of the dice. It's the other 6. That does not get in. Okay?
Mayor,
Yes.
would it be possible, I have a question for staff on our earlier question. I think it'll be quick, and I think
Sure.
everyone will agree with it. I just wanted to clarify the intent while we were still focused. So I had a question on question 1C2, which is the part that says that we would look at things like storage uses. I don't know who can answer my question, but so it says propose options for prohibiting uses along corridors that displace potential housing opportunities such as self-storage facilities or other uses that do not contribute to overall policy goals. And my question, I support that. I just wanted to make sure how staff would be interpreting that direction for lots with existing storage use built out. And I want to know if you would take that direction to mean that we should map such that the storage would not be an allowable use even for lots with existing storage on activity corridors.
I think that we take this to mean reevaluate how uses are applied in different zones and then how those zones are applied. So the effect of mapping on where certain uses are going to go, basically. But to your specific question about a use that's there already, so per our earlier conversation about non-complying, that would be the situation if a piece of property had a use that was subsequently not allowed. It would be some form of non-conforming would be allowed to exist.
I understand that, but you have enormous storage facilities on Burnett that would be prime places for residential. And what I'm asking is, at the time that they want to do anything else, would this direction make sure that they couldn't continue to be storage if they redeveloped?
Yeah, that would be the effect of the new code, is that when they redeveloped, if they wanted to change their use, that it could exist in perpetuity as a storage facility, but if they wanted to change their use, it would have to be to something else.
But would they be able to expand it or do any of that with?
I don't know the extent, but typically, like in today's code and in draft 3, there are provisions that do allow non-conforming, non-complying uses and structures to exist with some modification. So they can do some things, like if they need to do repair work or remodeling, but it can vary depending on how far out of compliance with the new code they are.
But like if they had there are, lots and lots back. I mean, it's a huge area that has 1-story storage. That if they wanted to go up to 4-story storage there, would they be allowed to do that, or would they have to do a different use?
I really can't answer something that specific without thinking about what the non-conforming clauses are going to be in the code. But I think that's where in the code it would be
I was
addressed.
asking if the direction created clarity that you would set up that situation, not necessarily to have clarity on exactly what would be in the code, but I wanted to make sure that you understood that direction. It looks like, right.
So as Greg was saying, the code currently has provisions that when a use is rendered non-conforming, there are certain limited allowances that are made for it to kind of redevelop. And that part of the code, like every other part of the code, will be open for review. And I think that very much sort of council's policy goals with respect to this language on self-storage will figure into that. And so I think staff will be looking at different kinds of nonconformities that arise by virtue of the code and trying to define better what makes sense in terms of the degree to which that use can potentially expand a little bit. And I think that the tenor of council's discussion very much around this situation and others as well is to really limit the degree to which non-conforming uses can be altered without having to come into compliance with current code. So that is, I think, definitely a part of the rewrite process that staff will be looking at very closely.
But do you have sufficient direction to do that? Or do we have to put more direction in here?
I think that what I've tried to say is that we read the direction that you've provided as very much giving us some guiding principles in terms of that issue. Sure. So if you want to provide more prescriptive direction, you certainly can.
I don't know how to do it legally. I just wanted to make sure that as part of what you would be doing in those cases, that you would be making every effort in a legal way to make sure that when they redevelop, they are not using prime real estate on our corridors for storage. Thank you. I think Jim had.
Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Flanagan.
So I can't recall if this was something that me and Councilmember Barbara Madison Renteria, or if it was something Councilmember Kitchen put in, but I think we're in agreement that my recollection of how the code generally works is you can remodel, you can repair a roof damaged by a storm, but you can't expand the use. So you couldn't add a second floor. I don't even think you could add a second unit in the back, like one more garage door with another square foot of storage space, which would definitely be my intent behind this is that I'm getting nods from staff. So I think there's direction and agreement.
Thank you. I just want to clarify that because there's a lot of real estate on our corridors.
Okay, anything else on this? Okay, we're still in section 4. Any other amendments? Anything else in number 4? Okay, I think those are the only ones we have before. We can always come back. Let's then look at section number 5.
Oh, Mayor, I
Yes.
just found something.
Okay.
It's another question.
Okay.
So this is under zoning map 3C. We're using language a little bit differently than we've used in other places. So it says the revised zoning map should include a transition zone that will eliminate the impact. In other places, we talk about reduce the impact. So I'm just curious. I'm sorry, what?
Where are you at?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's under the zoning map, page 8 of the posted version. Page 8 of the posted version. So it's
So it's section,
C. 3C.
question 4, 3 little c. Okay.
So I think that eliminate is supposed to be reduced. That's what we've done in other places. So I just wanted to point that out.
Okay. I think we intended to eliminate in order to be able to open it up.
Well, it's inconsistent then.
Where
So
you
why
want to
would
point
you?
out- Where's the other places?
What is intended by the term eliminate the impact of compatibility?
Where do you see reduce?
I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. So what is intended by the term eliminate the
That it
impact?
unlocks the corridor.
So does that mean no compatibility? Is that what that means?
That would mean that the compatibility is in essence achieved through how you zone the adjoining properties so as to ensure compatibility.
Okay. All right.
Except for the factors that we've included otherwise with
Okay.
respect to buffering and all those kinds of things. Okay? I think that gets us into question 5, parking. Does anybody have any changes to section 5, parking? Councilmember Kassar?
As I mentioned, I would move to strike the word walk shed, which is in the, just because our ADU ordinance does eliminate parking just within a quarter mile. That provides some predictability as opposed to a walk shed, which provides very little predictability what exactly that means.
Okay, is there a second to this amendment? Councilmember Renteria seconds it. Discussion. Councilmember Alter?
I thought that walk shed was what our transportation department had recommended last time that we used.
You thought what? I'm sorry.
That our transportation department had recommended the term walk shed.
Is there someone here from the transportation department?
She's coming up. They're conferring.
Danielle Morin, ATD. I can follow up with you on that. I don't think, as far as ATD is concerned, it really matters as long as there is an accessible route to and from the unit and the activity corridor. I think it could be either or, walk shed or without the quarter mile.
Okay. The amendment is on the table to strike the phrase, the word watershed. Any further discussion? Take a vote. Those in favor of striking the word watershed, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Pool, Kitchen, and Alter opposed. The others voting yes, it passes. Any other section here? Okay, I think those then are all the 5 questions that were asked by the manager with the direction. Before we proceed, anything else at this point? Councilmember Tovo?
Yeah, sorry, I missed a few things earlier.
Okay.
So, and I missed a parking one. Sorry, it's getting late. Amendment 8 goes in question 5 on page 10, please. And so this gets back to the language about where parking requirements would be particularly disruptive. I have attempted another fix at including what was in particular one of the suggestions that came from our community. And so the language is proposed to be may be maintained, let's see, except some parking requirements may be maintained for areas where elimination of parking requirements would be particularly disruptive or have a negative impact on the surrounding area, conditions to be determined by staff and to include the proximity of public schools. That seems to be the example that has come up again and again, including possibly in the AISD letter that we received back in Code Next.
Okay. Councilmember Tovo urges her amendment number 8 on the yellow sheet. Is there a second to that? Second to that? Councilmember
8
Poole,
on
second
page
that.
10.
Okay. Councilmember Poole seconds. Councilmember Kitchen, you want to address it?
I just wanted to say that this language, there's one word that does not reflect the posted version. We agreed last time to say conditions to be proposed by staff. So this language is off of the old version.
I see. Thank you. And I see that our draft document that got distributed also reflects that old language.
Is there any objection to this amendment? I'm sorry, what did you say?
I was just saying the draft that we are looking at also has that old language, so
yeah,
it would all be updated.
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody have any objection to these amendments? Councilmember Flanagan, you want to address it?
So I don't have an objection to the word proposed. If we're just correcting, I think, something of our original intent.
So proposed is in. That one should have been there.
Yeah.
It's in there now.
So, but I do have an objection to the rest of it. I think negative impact on surrounding areas is, to me, the same thing as particularly disruptive, and I think it's duplicative. But I challenge the proximity to public schools issue. I don't think that it's. I think there are competing interests when it comes to parking requirements near public schools. And the interest that I'm most concerned about is our ability to build housing around schools that are under-enrolled. And parking requirements can cause additional costs when it comes to building that housing, and specifically the type of housing we want to be able to have people walk to school. So I can't support the rest of this amendment.
I would certainly want staff to consider proximity to the school. I don't know what you would determine on that. I like conditions to be proposed by staff, but I'd like staff to consider that. I don't know whether it's right to do that or not. Councilmember Tovo, is there a way to put that into something that they need to consider when they're determining conditions?
Yeah, I think that was really the intent. So
That's it too.
I'm very comfortable with that interpretation. And to include consideration of the proximity of public schools.
Okay.
It's horribly wordy, but I think that captures that.
Okay, and to
concern.
include consideration of the proximity of schools. I think that one way or another, just tell us what you think. We're not prescribing that one. With that change, is there any objection to this amendment number 8? Councilmember Alter.
Before we had, lack of sidewalks, and that was taken out to have this generic thing that was supposed to cover both of them. So I would be more comfortable if we could add sidewalk situation or something for that context. And I mean, it's just going, if we're going to specify one, which I totally support specifying conditions for schools, and I hear what you're saying about an under-enrolled school, but we also have over-enrolled schools where it's a very big safety issue. So I don't know if there's a way, but if staff is understanding that, I'm not going to fight it. I'll let the school thing go.
Well, you've reminded me now. I forgot that earlier conversation because we did try to put some in, and then we had people that were adding things, and we could go back and see what the other ones were. And then we decided we would just leave it open without listing anything. I mean, I remember that reasoning now, that process.
But I'm okay to go forward with proximity to schools as long as, we have that other list as something staff knows about as part of that.
Okay, does anybody else want to speak up on this one? Councilor Poole?
I'm wondering if our Safe Routes to School efforts and the program that we have along those lines would take care of that. I think it probably does, but maybe the staff could give us an affirmative, even a thumbs up at this point. Oh, there we go. We have a nod and a thumbs up.
Okay,
I think the point is we want to make sure that kids are safe getting to and from school.
Okay, right now we have an amendment in front of us from Councilmember Tovo that has as the parentheses at the end, conditions to be proposed by staff and to include the consideration of the proximity of public schools. That's what's in front of us now. Councilmember Kitchen.
I just wanted to also speak to the same kind of concern that Councilmember Alter raised. If we're going to put in some specifics, I'd like to put back in the specifics we had before, which was narrow streets without sidewalks. So I would say, and to include consideration of the proximity of public schools, comma, and narrow streets without sidewalks.
Councilmember Kitchen moves to amend the amendment by adding at the end of it, and narrow streets without sidewalks.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councilmember Alter. Further discussion on the amendment from Councilmember Kitchen. Any objection? Okay. Any discussion?
We voted on this before and it failed, just saying.
Right. Let's take a vote. Those in favor of the Kitchen amendment, please raise your hand. Kitchen, Tovo, Poole, and Alter does not pass. We have the Tovo amendment in front of us. Anyone want to propose any amendments to this? Let's take a vote. Those in favor of the Tovo amendment, please raise your hand. Alter, Kitchen, Tovo, and Poole. Those opposed, please raise your hand. The balance of the dais. 8 does not make it in. Anything else in this document before we go to the additions? Yes, Councilmember Tovo?
Yes, I have 2 more. I apologize that I missed Amendment 1. My Amendment 1, and this goes into the overall scope. This is on the first page, question 1, overall scope, where it says the manager should work to deliver a new code that's simplified, can be applied consistently. Wait a minute, I think we did do this one. And furthers the goals of the city. Yes, we did that one, sorry.
Okay.
That one now reads, let me just double check. That one now says, and furthers the goals of the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan.
I think it said the goals of the city is I think where we ended up.
I thought, okay, then I do need indeed to offer Amendment 1.
Okay.
And so the language
what?
would be, just as a reminder.
This is question number 1. This is overall scope, so it's right up front, right?
Yep. And it would just remind, be a reminder of what triggered this process and what the Land Development Code rewrite was supposed to do. It was one of the goals of Imagine Austin. So it would say, provide more flexible standards while continuing, and add on the language, while continuing to implement the goals of the Imagine Austin.
Wait a second. It looks like it may have been already adopted.
No, that was amended. I'm sorry. Amendment 1.
Amendment 10 did that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I am mixed up. Okay, I'll find that one in a minute.
Okay, so I'm now looking at the updated with the pinned amendments, and it says under overall scope, the last sentence is the manager should work to deliver a new code that is simplified, can be applied consistently, and further. I'm looking at something in my hand that says the goals of the city. I think that came from staff, but I think that
we had amended it to be Imagine Austin.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, adopted today. It was earlier
Yeah,
today.
sorry.
Got it.
Yeah, so
I'm
now it
looking
is.
up.
That one is amended. I think
Okay.
I intended to add in additional language. Amendment 1 adds an additional language, and I just need to remind myself where that goes. and I'll do that in just a second.
Okay.
I would like to revisit on page 4, as we've talked throughout the day, there's been a conversation about increasing the supply of missing middle housing and including an affordable housing bonus. And I remain concerned about where that language, where economically viable. As I read the letter from several housing advocates who have written to us, including the letter from Housing Works, who have encouraged us and have said we support the inclusion of provisions to create diverse housing types and which tie any increase in development capacity to an affordability requirement. I think those in the housing community have urged us, or members of the housing community have urged us to tie those increases to an affordable housing component, and where economically viable, I think offers too big of a window for that not to happen. So I would like to either strike that language, where economically viable, or provide another sentence somewhere that simply says, in general, any increase in development capacity should be tied to an affordability requirement.
I think striking that language where economically viable achieves the result that you wanted.
Great.
So
Then
let's
that's
just
my
treat the
motion.
amendment that way. Councilmember Tovo moves to amend the document by striking where economically viable in answer to question number 2, number 1, objective, B, I. It reads to increase the supply of missing middle housing, which will include an affordable housing bonus. And then Councilmember Tovo moves to strike where economically viable. Is there a second to that? Councilmember Alter seconds that. Discussion. Yes, Councilmember Harper Madison.
I've been very fortunate to be able to ask some candid questions to folks who understand the economics behind building homes. And it's my understanding that economically viable here basically represents what's possible. And I get the impression that anything under about 10 units is not economically viable for builders and therefore would probably not happen, in which case I think economically viable is important here.
Any further discussion? Councilmember Flanagan.
I just seem to recall that we debated this pretty extensively last week, so I won't be supporting this again.
Further discussion?
And I'll just remind that the units, and I think at least one of those who wrote to us echoed this, that it doesn't, if it's for a smaller scale project, we may be looking at a fee in lieu rather than a unit. And again, I think I realize we talked about this last week, but in the intervening time, we've gotten the letter from Housing Works and at least one other housing advocate who has written independently, or urging us to tie those entitlements to an affordable housing component. And as I said throughout the day, I've heard several references, almost from the perspective that sounded to me like we're assuming that that's the case. And again, I think the language we have here is loose.
So I'm going to vote against this too, but it's with the understanding that nothing has said that the bonus program has to have a full, complete unit. So if what's economically viable is a partial payment or is a fee in lieu for a partial unit, and that makes it's economically viable to do that, makes sense for us to do that administratively, cost it otherwise. If it makes sense for us to do that, we want to capture all the affordability we can. So I'm going to oppose it because that's still my understanding with respect to this. Any further discussion? Councilmember Flanagan.
And I would note, I think Councilmember Alter, you said last week that that fee could be $50. It could be something really de minimis, I think was the word you used. And I would want staff to measure that against the cost to the city to administer and manage the program. So I think there is a cost to us to do it, that we'd want that fee to fit into that context.
Okay. We have an amendment in front of us. Take a vote. Those in favor of this amendment from Councilmember Tovo, please raise your hand. Councilmembers Alter, Kitchen, Tovo, and Poole. Those opposed, raise your hand. It's the balance of the dais. So 4-7, it's not included. Anything else?
Mayor, before we move into the new sections,
Yes.
You had mentioned, I think there was some confusion earlier about whether Councilmember Alter's addition of regional centers was a separate sentence or a modification. And I just wanted to make sure that legal had captured that downtown had its own sentence and then regional centers had a sentence after that. Just wanted
Okay,
to
how did legal capture that?
I'll find it, but my recollection is it's a separate.
Just wanted to make sure.
I'll look it up.
So that for the record, those were two separate sentences. Anything else? Councilmember Kitchen.
Councilmember Cassar, I thought you were bringing something. I have some suggested language if you don't.
I'd be interested in hearing yours.
Okay. And this could be just direction if we prefer to do that, but something to the effect that staff will consider mapping transition areas and high opportunity areas not impacted by environmental concerns in order to achieve goals related to housing throughout the city.
Can you read it one more time?
Sorry, I went too fast.
Oh, that's okay.
Staff will consider, this goes back to the conversation we had earlier, and I was trying to tee off what you had said in the conversation, so Councilmember Ellis. So staff will consider mapping transition areas in high opportunity areas not impacted by environmental concerns in order to achieve goals related to housing throughout the city. And this just goes back to our earlier conversation that when you look at the map, there's a lot of, there's significant areas of the city that are high opportunity areas west of MOPAC that are not impacted. Now, we understand that a lot of those areas have preserves or other environmental features, and that's why I said not impacted by environmental concerns. Maybe there's a better word than that. But we have also said that our goals are that all parts of the city should be, that all parts of the city should be included in looking at housing. So, we could give this as direction. I'm okay if this is direction to staff. It's just that the language we use right now for located in a high opportunity area is just not clear on what's happening. So we either need language or just give direction to staff.
Could you repeat what you said?
I have staff will consider.
I'm sorry, where is this going?
Yeah.
Where in the document?
This goes back to the conversation.
There is
that we
not
had.
written down. This is language we're being given. This was not handed out as an amendment. It came
I
up.
know, but where in the base?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is in the language that we talked about a little bit earlier.
I think it's Q43I. Let's look there.
Yeah.
No, that's not it. It's 3E, 3E, a little 4. Because this is one of the 4 items that Councilmember Cassar had identified. Actually, I think it's one of the areas that Councilmember Garza, it's the area that you and Councilmember Cassar had proposed.
Yes, 3EI4.
Yeah, where it says located in a high opportunity area.
Okay.
So I was earlier in our conversation, I was trying to clarify where that applies, and so we had some conversation about that. The interpretation is that it would apply in other areas too. So I said I'm suggesting staff will consider mapping transition areas in high opportunity areas not impacted by environmental concerns in order to achieve goals related to housing throughout the city.
Okay, so the higher opportunity area was one of several characteristics that was trying to determine the intensity of the transition area along corridors. I think your thing belongs in this section, but I'm not sure it belongs as an I,
Oh, okay.
as much as it is just another letter
That's fine.
at the end of it.
That's fine.
Okay, so it would be N, and we use N euphemistically at this point.
No.
It would be O or PQ, it could be at this point.
Whatever the number is.
Whatever the letter is. Let's continue further discussion. Councilmember Kitchen makes that amendment. Is there a second to that amendment? Is there a second? Councilmember Poole seconds it. Councilmember Flanagan?
So I think little 4 covers it because it's all the high opportunity areas. So that covers all those areas. What what I heard, what I understood we talked about, that Councilmember Alter also talked about, is that when we get analysis on housing goals, that we're not including areas that are preserved or areas that, because that happened the last time around and it's weirdly skewed the numbers. So I think it already says that the revision should map properties for missing middle housing, et cetera, located in high opportunity areas. So I'm not sure what we're adding.
Should I speak to that?
Yes.
Okay. Our conversation earlier was about if you look at the high opportunity areas, most of them are west of Mopac.
Yeah.
And there are some areas where you have some transit priority network, but a lot of, particularly in the Northwest, but there are a lot of areas where you don't. So, and you also don't have activity corridors. So this just goes to the question that I raised earlier, which was, in a high opportunity area, what were you going to map off of? And if you're only mapping off of the transit priority network or Imagine Austin centers or corridors, there's parts of town that are high opportunity areas that we're not addressing any additional housing in.
But I think we are right here.
So in section 3, question 3, 2, zoning map, we said that we would do transition areas adjacent to activity centers, activity corridors, or in transit priority networks. So that's where the transition areas were.
Right.
So I would think then that the language on 4, where it was talking about E, where it's talking about missing middle housing in transition areas, are keying off of those activity centers and activity corridors. So I think the question that Councilmember Kitchen is putting in front of us is a different question, which is, in addition to those, as transition areas were described, do we also want to put it just generally in high opportunity areas? And for me, I just don't know how that would be done or what that would look like, so I'm not comfortable giving that direction.
Okay, that's different than the conversation, not you, but I thought from the Councilmember Kassar said earlier that he was going to work on some language related to this. And I just want us to understand that we're potentially leaving out significant portions of high opportunity zones. But if people don't want to, I think the staff needs to be clear on what they're mapping for transition zones and transition areas and what they're not. And that we're making a decision as a council that we're going to leave off high opportunity areas that are in the western part of the city. And I frankly I'm not sure why we're doing that, because we said that we wanted to achieve goals related to housing throughout the city. But
in my mind, it's consistent with the kinds of things that I think a lot of people have been discussing. There are some people that want to have an increased housing and density all over the city. There are some people that would limit that. I've spoken for me about trying to thread that needle by focusing on the corridors where we have greater density and then doing transition areas off that, between that and the balance of neighborhoods. So for me, that's the right compromise. And it fits with it being along those higher dense areas because of the other things that we have relating to missing middle housing. Okay. I think that those are the places in the city where people are going to get most use of transit, most ability to be able to walk, and where density actually fits the most. So for me, I mean, it's not something I'm going to support. Councilmember Kassar.
And Mayor, and to Councilmember Kitchen's point, I've been trying to come up with language that satisfies me, but it would be creating, it wouldn't necessarily be a transition zone if it weren't off of a street. I want to make sure, especially in some of those areas that we would actually develop it, because I know if we just map R4, for example, on top of a newly built subdivision that was built in the last 10 years, we're mapping R4, but we're probably not getting any real capacity out of that. So I am, again, open to and interested in finding ways to map more missing middle in places where we may not have it mapped. Under this process, I've just tried typing up a few things while trying to pay attention to the dais, and I'm just still not satisfied with what I have in front of me.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to vote on this.
We said, absolutely, we can. Your amendment has been moved and seconded. Further discussion. Councilmember Madison Harper. Harper Madison.
Were you referring to me?
Harper Madison. Yes.
No, not you. Councilmember Kassar.
No, sorry.
Oh, okay. Because I could swear you said Councilmember Houston, and I didn't want to laugh at you publicly without doing that.
I don't, we can check the tape.
I'm checking it later.
Yeah, we'll check it later. You let me know.
Further discussion on the kitchen amendment. Councilmember Flanagan.
So I'm, in rereading this, I'm seeing it more clearly how you're seeing it, Ann, and the last thing I want to do is exempt any part of town. I've made that pretty clear. I was reading this broader than it's written, and that's where I was hung up. Because I am perfectly fine directing staff to figure out how to achieve missing middle housing in all high opportunity areas. I think Councilman Kassar has a good point. A lot of those areas were built in the last 10 years. They're not going to turn over to our housing goals in the next 10 years. But there's stuff that's being built now, and there's stuff that I mean, frankly, I've got a lot more apartment complexes going up in those areas than I have single-family homes anymore. But I would support language, and I want to hear, because I think this was just done, is it written down somewhere?
No, I just...
Okay, good. So that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But now I better understand what you're saying.
Yes.
Because I thought this covered it, but I see now that it doesn't. So will you read it one more time? Because I think
Okay.
I might support this.
Okay, and I'm open to adjusting the language,
Yeah.
but staff will consider, so in other words, we'll see what they come up with. Staff will consider mapping transition areas, or we could just say mapping missing middle, in high opportunity areas not impacted by environmental concerns in order to help achieve goals related to housing throughout the city.
Yeah, and I think as long as it says missing middle, because I think Councilman Kassar's point is transition only applies to corridors, and so saying missing middle, and then I can support it.
Okay, I'll read it one more time. Then it says, staff will consider mapping missing middle areas in high opportunity areas not impacted by environmental concerns in order to help achieve goals related to housing throughout the city.
Okay. In order to help achieve goals
Related to housing throughout the city.
related to housing throughout the city. Okay, again, we have the kitchen amendment. Any further discussion before we vote? Let's take a vote. Those in favor of the kitchen amendment, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Garza and I are voting no, and Alter's voting no. The others voting.
I'm abstaining.
Councilmember Harper Madison abstains. So on a 7-3-1 vote, this amendment passes. Is included. Okay. Yes.
Before we move on to the additional section, I had a question that I'd posed, a question that I've been asked multiple times this last couple of weeks, and maybe others have as well. And I did give our city attorney a heads up about it. I've been asked, and I think we all got asked this question during the Code Next conversation as well, whether property owners would have valid petition rights once the council takes action on the map and land development code.
Council, they would not. The zoning protest petition rights are limited to individual properties or small areas, but a comprehensive revision and a complete rewrite of our zoning code does not afford that opportunity.
Okay.
Thanks for that explanation.
All right, let's move then to addition number 1, which is planning section.
So, Mayor, I think it's my amendment.
Okay.
I have an amendment to it that's just got several sections to it. I don't know if somebody's comes before mine.
I think mine may be the one that.
Yeah,
that
there's
you're
your
amending.
there's your
Yeah.
original, and then mine amends it.
Yeah, and I spent some time looking through the additions that Councilmember Kassar is offering on the small area planning or district level planning that we were talking about, and I have no objection to any of what he has offered to add, and I would see them all as friendly. And that might actually move us more quickly through something that to get
Okay.
us to finishing up tonight.
That would be good. So I'm on planning, Kassar's item number 9. Does anybody have any objection with the amendments in addition, number 1, that came from Mr. Kassar? Hearing none, they're included. Any other amendments or changes to the planning section? Okay, then let's go then to addition 2, affordable housing.
Mayor, are we adopting that
We're going
Planning
to adopt
section?
everything in just a second.
in a sec?
We'll adopt everything in a second, unless we divide the
I
question.
mean, I have an objection to the planning section as a whole.
Oh, okay. Okay, so let's then, you're correct. So,
Thank you.
because the planning wasn't part of the base document.
Right.
Gotcha, okay. Now, discussion on the planning section as amended. Mr. Flanagan.
So my objection is not detailed. It is more high level that I still struggle with the value that this will provide, and it's something I think we can easily take up later and is not necessary at this stage, but that's all I feel like saying right now.
Sounds good. Ready to take a vote on the planning section? Those in favor of the planning section, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Flanagan and Garza voting no. Others voting aye. That section is included. That gets us to addition 2, affordable
It's like a CO.
housing.
No pawn shops.
Any discussion on the affordable housing section?
Yes, Mayor.
Councilmember Kitchen?
Ready? Okay, so I know that Councilmember Kassar has some amendments. What I would prefer to do is start with the language that I have included, because we agreed to most of it last time, and there were just 4 areas that people wanted to discuss in more detail. And so now, it was not my intention to leave out any aspects of the strategic housing blueprint. I simply went through and picked out the things that appeared to me to be relevant to the Land Development Code, because there are a lot of recommendations in the ASHP that are not specific, that aren't impacted by the Land Development Code. But if Councilmember Kassar feels like some of these need to be added back in, I don't have any problem with that. Happy to list them so that we can list more or all of the items that he indicates. I have no problem with that. We could do that. I'm also not attempting to establish any priority amongst any of them. So I'm not aware of any language that I have that does that, but if there's something that people are concerned about, I'm happy to talk about that too. My intention was simply to make sure that we provide direction that the ASHP recommendations be included in the Land Development Code to the extent that they involve language that goes in the Land Development Code. So I would prefer to, Councilmember Kassar, I'd prefer to stay with the language that I had and have you amend onto that if you would like to add any items.
Mayor.
Councilmember Kassar.
So, I had pinned some of these items. I think others had as well. And in trying to go and address each of them, I recognized that it might be most clean and clearer to do a bit of a replacement. And the reason is this. There are 27 key action items in the blueprint that relate to Land Development Code. 27 key actions that are LDC related. The motion sheet from Councilmember Kitchen includes 12 of the 27 and doesn't include the other 15. So what I did was I just went and listed all 27 of them. And the key action items as listed in the blueprint, some of them have asterisks next to them because they're high priority. And so I made sure to re-include the high priority ones because, so for example, what we have before us includes allowing development of smaller houses on smaller lots, but excludes comprehensive parking reform. It includes link housing choices with transportation choices, but excludes things like streamlined city codes and permitting processes. So I've added them all back in so that it doesn't look like there's priority. And then I took out some of the commentary that, frankly, sometimes varies a little bit from the housing blueprint and then sometimes adds things that aren't in the housing blueprint at all. So, for example, it is added in here that DSD should track all of our preserved housing units, and that isn't in the blueprint. DSD maybe should do that. Maybe it should be the housing department, but that seems to be directing a department to do a new thing that they're not doing. That's also not in the blueprint. It asks for our housing bonus programs to work with the housing authority, which is great. It's just not in the blueprint, and I think we're currently working on a wait list resolution to try to do some of that work. And that is an important piece of work for us to do. We can do it in housing committee. We can do it on the ICE. It's just bringing something in that's not in the blueprint. And so I just think it would be most clean to just add the 27 LDC action items from the blueprint directly and then not risk having paragraphs of text that sometimes match fully, sometimes match in part, and then sometimes don't match what's in the blueprint. So that's why I just have a clean amendment to just try to add the blueprint highlights and then let the staff refer to the blueprints into how they are implemented. So, a lot of this stuff is stuff that I totally agree with. I sponsored the resolution to require developments that receive city funds and entitlements to accept vouchers. I'm cutting that not because I don't support it. I sponsored the resolution to do it. I just want to cut the paragraphs that describe things in the blueprint because sometimes they vary in a variety of ways from the blueprint, and I just don't want to have to parse through that or risk changing direction from the blueprint here. That's why I just have the 27 action items.
Can I speak?
Okay, Councilor Kitchen.
Well, I understand that, and I didn't want to have to. They're not. I don't think they're different, because the language that we took is from the blueprint. So, frankly, having to go back and parse out the way that you rewrote this against what I had was difficult to do at the last minute. And my concern is that it's losing some of the information that I had. So, and the language that I included is straight out of the blueprint. So I'm not sure where you're saying something is and where you're saying it's not. So I'm not sure where to go with this. I frankly would prefer to keep the language I have. All except for 4 were agreed to last time. So
I think that we have 2 different ways of approaching it. We have yours, which has 4 amendments, and we have Kassar's, which is an extensive
which is a substitute.
amendment.
Can I just move the substitute since she's moved the base?
I think in this instance we could do this. So we would, in that instance, when you make a substitute like that, you treat each of them individually and you get each one to the best place it could be in, and then you vote on them. Is how a substitute is handled. It might be easier just to treat the amendments in turn and then decide. There are 2 ways to go here on that. And I think it might be easier to do it that way. Councilmember Kitchen.
one other thing, there's just a few places where your amendment takes out some specificity that I had. So, for example, and it's just 2, I think, but it says, or 2, not to mention the language that you took out. But basically, I said implement recommendations for achieving these goals included in the Austin Strategic Housing Blueprint and the ASHB implementation plan once adopted by council.
That's
So you deleted that, and I'd like to include that.
What language is that?
It says,
Okay.
and to implement recommend.
I see it. I see
I
it.
think the reason I cut that is because the implementation plan is not up for a council vote.
I'm not.
The blueprint was, but the implementation plan isn't voted on because that's a changing living document.
Okay.
The implementation plan will be coming back to us in
Sure.
May, and we can choose to adopt it if we want to at that point. So this just says once adopted by council. So if it's not adopted, then it's not an issue.
Sure, if adopted by council.
So the other thing is the producing the 100 permanent supportive housing units each year. I had extensive conversations with the housing community, and they preferred language that I had, which relates to producing permanent supportive housing sufficient to meet the need.
So is
Okay,
that
let's
is there a
give
change?
someone else a chance to talk here. Mr. Flanagan?
Not to steal my colleague's thunder, but do we need to take a motion to extend past 10 o'clock?
Mr. Flanagan moves to extend past 10.
This is going to catch us there.
Mr. Flanagan moves to move past 10. Is there a second to that? Thank you. Councilmember Ellis, take a vote. Those in favor of extending past 10, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Councilmember Alter votes no. The others voting aye. We'll extend past 10. Get this done. Councilmember Flanagan.
Thank you. My hesitation with this section is that we have effectively, through Councilmember Tovo's amendments, adopted all of the strategic housing blueprint into this by including the goals of the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan, which includes the blueprint. So I'm trying to figure out what of this section is new that's not in the blueprint, because I think that's the only part we really need to adopt. And if we're unable to kind of divine that, then I'm just going to vote no on the whole thing.
Okay. Councilmember Kitchen?
Well, actually, we've adopted the blueprint, but what we haven't done, the blueprint is just a set of recommendations. It doesn't then say to staff, please put this in the land development code. So we have to adopting the blueprint did not implement anything of those recommendations that are in there. We have to take a step to say what we'd like to see in the land development code. So that's the distinction.
I think we will just have to agree to disagree on that distinction.
Okay.
Well, okay, so then, we can ask staff about that. If they're going to automatically write into the land development code all of those recommendations.
So I would like to ask staff if the recommendations in the blueprint are going to be considered as they draft the code, because I would assume that they would be.
And part of it looks like, while you're up here to address it, it looks like some of the things that are in here are not really things that are land development code. We don't do permanent supportive housing out of the code. That's a lot of the stuff that happens outside of a code. So I'm having trouble. I think I share some of the same thoughts of Mr. Flanagan. And so would you address all those issues?
Sure. Lacey Patterson, Planning and Zoning. First, to address, yes, as the blueprint is a part of adopted council policy, we will be looking at all the elements within that as they relate to the land development code. Second, there are elements within the blueprint that we can't incorporate through the code and thus won't incorporate into this process.
Okay. Councilmember Kassar.
I would can we end this part just by taking a cold vote on which of the two versions to implement, and we'll just go from there?
Sure.
Okay. All right, we're going to take two votes. First, we're going to vote on kitchen amendment and as amended, and then we'll take a vote on Kassar if kitchens does not pass. Those in favor of the kitchen amendment, please raise your hand. Alter, Kitchen, Tovo, and Poole. Those opposed, please raise your hand. It's a balance of the dice. It doesn't pass 4-7. Let's now vote on Councilmember Kassar. So those in favor of it, please.
Wait, I have a question.
Okay.
Will you agree to make the changes that I pointed out earlier?
I think your changes just said implement this. If we adopt the implementation plan, can you do that too, and do everything we can to support PSH. That can be done in the code.
I'd like to be more specific.
Sure.
The language that I worked out with the housing community was to produce permanent supportive housing units in sufficient numbers to meet the need.
Sure. The land development code should do everything it can. And the thing is, permanent supportive housing is a social service. So what the LDC can best do is help us drive down the cost of rent as low as possible. But really, ultimately for PSH, what we need is staffing, which is not an LDC thing. But in the end, but doing everything we can might mean liberalizing congregate living and relaxing parking and doing everything we can to drive down the cost of the unit, and then we have to provide the social services around.
I would disagree.
Okay.
Permanent supportive housing can be a type of zoning category. So the point I'm trying to make is that the use that you have here of the 100 is what we want to strike, because the housing community.
Got it. So you don't like the number 100 because we just want to meet the need.
100 is insufficient.
I agree.
All right, so let's handle these in turn. So the first one here, you had stricken the language in number 2, implement recommendations for achieving these goals. Councilmember Kitchen is asking that be put back in, but taking once and turning it into if.
Great.
Anybody have an objection with that? Hearing none, that language is back into Councilmember Casares. It's number 2 there, and once adopted by council is changed to if adopted by council, that's put back in. Then on the next one, it says produce 100 permanent supportive housing units each year. And the language you would propose was produce
sufficient
needed,
number. I'm sorry.
Produce needed permanent support.
No, the language that I had was produce permanent supportive housing in sufficient numbers to meet the need, and then you'd strike the rest of it.
That's fine.
Produce permanent supportive housing sufficient to meet the need.
Mm-hmm. And strike the rest. That's fine.
And strike the rest. Any objection to that? Hearing none. Oh, sorry. See, you're behind Ann. There you are. I see you now.
Stand up this.
You lean back, and Ann is right up on the table.
I guess I just have some questions about, and this is where I'm leaning to y'all for, having a little more in the way of institutional knowledge. I don't understand how permanent supportive housing has anything to do with the land development code. It sounds like a subsidized social service programmatic thing that doesn't have anything to do with land development code. I'm just very confused.
Mayor.
And would love some guidance there.
My sense on this is that as Councilmember Cassar said, while we can't make them permanent supportive housing because that requires social services, and for me, what that means is we have to create the conditions that will make that the best, the easiest to be able to do. So we'll hit really hard the affordable housing sections that we have in here. I mean, there are a lot of things we can do. One component of permanent supportive housing is the actual physical space itself. Mm-hmm. We want to create as many of those spaces as least expensively as we can in the places that we can, as many as we can. And that's what the land development code, for me, can do to help contribute to that. So there are things to do, but ultimately can't deliver it by itself. It needs the social service folks and the other programs. But to the degree that the land development code can help facilitate that, we should be doing what we can to help it. Did you want to address that?
I did just want to say that as far as I understand, there is no zoning category for permanent supportive housing. Right. But I concur that, you do have to have zoning that would allow affordable housing, which is...
And we want to be able to do it as inexpensively as we can so that we can actually get it on the ground and those kinds of things. So I think that's how I would answer, for me, the question that you asked.
I guess a part 2 of that question, and then, so are we talking multifamily? And if that's the case, are we talking multifamily all around the city, all across the city, everywhere? Otherwise, if we're not, are we not talking about permanent supportive housing eligibility all over the city?
We're talking about creating affordable units consistent with this document in as many places as we can consistent with this document. And then hopefully some of those places will turn up to be permanent supportive housing.
Will, right?
Hopefully. All right. Any objections to including Mr. Flanagan? We're really close. I think we have 2 more votes. Mr. Flanagan, 3 more.
I remember Councilmember Kitchen and I having this conversation last Thursday. I think where the split was is that things like congregate care are a use, which is a function of zoning, but there isn't a zone called PSH. And I think that's just where we had that conversation last week.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is in the land development code. It may not be a zoning category per se, but there are aspects of the land development code that impact how you might want to do permanent supportive housing.
God, I think we're okay with this. It'll just, whatever the land development can do to help with that, it's going to do. Any objection to that language? Hearing none, that language is included. Okay? With those changes, let's take a vote on the affordable housing section. Those in favor of it, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Flanagan votes no. Okay, Harper-Madison abstains. The others voting aye. That section is in. Any other amendments anywhere in this thing? Councilmember Garza, it looks like you handed one out here.
I did. I sat on this for a while, and where this came from was going back to, this all started with Councilmember Gassar's and mine, the joint post that was 5 pages, and now we're at a document that's 10? I don't know where we are. How many is this? Whatever, how many ever numbers of pages that is. And this language came out. This language was in the original document, and as we are, at the end, and we all know that the challenges that we often hear about throughout the city, we all have things that are special to each of our districts, but our housing, which is a nationwide crisis that we're in, but obviously affecting us too, and our congestion issues. And so I just wanted, as we've, everyone knows my concerns about the amount of weedy stuff we did here, but I just wanted to kind of bring us back to why it's so important for us to continue this work, which is difficult, but and that is that we, at the end of the day, should prioritize all types of homes for all kinds of people in all parts of town. And the parentheticals are strategic housing blueprint goals. I'm sorry if I didn't point out, this is on page 1, under 1, question 1 overall scope. And a development pattern that supports the 50-50 transportation mode share by 2039. And then in a parenthetical, our Austin strategic mobility plan. And sorry I explained that without asking for a second.
Okay. You're forgiven. Is there a second to this? Councilmember Pissar seconds it. Now, Councilmember Harper-Madison seconds it. Any further discussion? Ready to take a vote?
Okay.
Councilmember Alter.
Thank you, Councilmember Garza, for passing this out. I just wanted to ask staff, since we just got this and it's after 10, is there an example of something that they would do with that language that wouldn't otherwise be done without its inclusion in this document?
I kind of hope it summarizes everything else we did.
I just want to make sure
Oh, no, I
we're not
understand.
adding
That's a good question to
something
ask.
that
It's a good question to ask.
is not already.
Brent Lloyd, Development Officer. It's in the nature of a value statement, and the document has a lot of value statements in it. If there is a new feature to it, I think it emphasizes or elevates the importance of the Austin Strategic Mobility Plan. But I can't at the moment see that there's any singular aspect of staff's work that would be directed by this, but it definitely expresses a policy.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take a vote. Those in favor of the Garza Amendment 1, please raise your hand. Those opposed? It's unanimous on the dais.
And Mayor,
Councilmember.
I appreciate the Mayor Pro Tem bringing this forward to us, because after over a dozen pages of all of these details, I think it is really important to bring back to home why it is exactly we are we are doing this. So I appreciate coming back up to the top and not making this the first line.
Yes. All right, let's take a vote on the direction to the city manager as amended here today. Councilmember Poole.
I just wanted to say a couple things before we took the vote, if that's possible. So I just had a couple of remarks that I wanted to be sure got into the record. So I appreciate the work that everybody has put into this document, and although we seem to have strayed from the high-level policy guidance that the city manager had asked for, I am supportive of him putting the questions before us. I'm deeply concerned about the long-term future effects of the framework we've set up here. While I'm pleased about some of the direction that is being given, and I'm obviously supportive of the environmental planning and affordable housing additions, among others, I ultimately do not agree with some of the core direction being given here. An example of something that I cannot support is how far the transition zones are proposed to extend into our neighborhoods. That kind of change will eat up many neighborhoods, not only in District 7, but across the city. The resulting demolitions and higher land values that come with those kinds of entitlement increases are very troubling to me and to many of my constituents. I needed a more careful, balanced approach to be on board with this document, one that recognizes our multiple priorities and holds true to our comprehensive plan, Imagine Austin. The ultimate code draft that comes to us later this fall will be the roadmap for development in Austin for the next several decades. We need to keep our eyes on what we want this city to look like in 30 to 50 years. I believe we do not have to sacrifice our quality of life for our city to be livable, affordable, and resilient with complete communities everywhere. That's a core value for me, and I need to be closer to achieving that balance to support the overall direction the council is adopting here today. So I will be voting no on this document. Thank you.
Councilmember Kitchen.
I have a question, and then I would like to say something before the vote. But
Okay.
First, my question. So we're voting on a document tonight that we don't have in front of us and that the public doesn't have in front of us. We're all doing our best to write down these amendments and changes that we've made going forward. But I'm very troubled about voting on something where I don't have the opportunity to read it all in front of me. I also don't have the opportunity, although I would like to suggest that after we vote tonight, which I know that we're going to, that there's, I would prefer to vote when I have a document in front of me, but I'm certain that I'm in the minority here. But I don't think that's the way to do business. And I am hopeful that what that means is when we get the final document, we will be able to make adjustments if it doesn't reflect what we adopted here tonight. I know that our staff will do everything they can to get the best, most accurate language that we agreed to, and I really appreciate that. But we saw tonight a couple of instances already in which we didn't have the most current information included in the document. So I am prepared to vote tonight because I know that any suggestion I would make not to would not be acceptable. So I just want to do a place mark right now that I intend to look closely at the document shortly after this, and I would expect that our staff will turn around a document immediately, as soon as you can, so that we then have the opportunity as council members, if we see something that was not our understanding that we voted on, that we can address it. So with that caveat, I will vote tonight.
Okay. Anything else anybody wants to say? Councilmember Walther?
Thank you. This has been a hard process, and I want to thank my colleagues for the work that went into this. We come to this with a diversity of perspectives and experiences, but I know that we share a set of values that are guiding us towards our goals. I do believe that we can grow our city equitably and that a new code can and should increase our supply of affordable housing while also protecting our environment for future generations. There are a number of items in this final document and direction that I wholeheartedly support and applaud, and I think we have more in common than that which separates us. I'm going to spare you enumerating those because it's late, but I have not made a secret of the fact that I have some concerns about how we're mapping the transitions. While I do believe that we can add capacity to our corridors, and I would support mapping missing middle housing in the lot behind the corridor, I'm very uncomfortable with the way that we have decided to approach the transitions without planning and without a focus on understanding what's on the ground. I'm going to hope for the best when this document and this product, or the product, returns to us in October. And if we see that that product produces significant community benefits for the most vulnerable Austinites, then I will perhaps be able to support these reforms. At the moment, though, I'm not convinced that the product we will get back will deliver the balance of income-restricted housing, parkland, environmental protections, and just overall housing that will be necessary for me to support it. As your colleague, my pledge is to continue to strive to build common ground around our shared values. My pledge to the community is to continue to voice the concerns that I hear from you and to insist that we have real data and facts that we're working from. I will continue to work towards balancing the various housing, environmental, and quality of life goals that we endeavor to accomplish.
Okay. Councilmember Garza?
Yeah, I appreciate everyone making those comments. I just want to reiterate again that this is direction, and it is suggestions, and I guess it's to hear that, there's concerns about not having a final document. I just want to make sure, not that this was the intent of that comment, that everyone knows that there is no final decision being made tonight on this. This is simply direction for a draft to come back, and then there will be time for all of us to once again likely have very similar discussions that we had tonight again when we see that draft again.
Councilmember Kitchen?
Okay, I just wanted to make a few comments. And yes, thank you for that, Councilmember Garza. It is direction, but one of my concerns is goes beyond suggestions. It's prescriptive in a number of areas, and it's more prescriptive than I think is prudent to get the best result. I'm also troubled by us prescribing certain direction without analysis, and also without even agreeing to request analysis. I find both of those things very troubling. I would also say, though, that there is a lot good in this and a lot that I agree with. I have always shared the goals of additional housing in the city, and particularly additional affordable housing for everyone. So I will continue to work with my colleagues as this comes back to us. I will be looking for information about the impact, because one of the things that's very important to me is that we actually achieve the goals that we've set out to achieve. And so I would like to see analysis, modeling, testing, all those kinds of things, so that we understand what we're getting when it comes back to us. So all in all, I will be voting for this with those caveats. I remain concerned about certain aspects of it, but I do share the overarching goals that are in this direction, and I'm hopeful that our staff feels sufficiently empowered to look at our overall goals and areas in this document where we may have been suggesting something that is difficult to do or actually doesn't work out, that our staff will feel comfortable coming back to tell us that. So.
Mayor.
Councilmember Garcia?
You know, and I feel like that we're finally heading on the right direction. You know, when I first got on the council, we tried all kinds of different, from stopping demolitions, from displacement. We voted down some multi-housing units because we thought it was just too expensive. You know, it was selling for $250,000 to $300,000. You know, and we tried all these, and we just couldn't prevent the displacement that was going on. And I had to change. I love this city, and I really love where I live at, and I hate to see the change, but I saw the change coming. All my friends that I grew up with don't live in East Austin anymore. They're gone. You know, I would probably have to go to Buda or Kyle. That's where the people are leaving, because they can't afford to live here. And if we don't provide more affordable housing, you know, we're going to lose all the low-income people especially from the inner city. You know, so it was a difficult decision for me to turn around and say, hey, we need to really focus on density and really start building, you know, smaller units. You know, we don't have the families anymore of 10 people. You know, I grew up with 10 brothers and sisters, so you don't see that anymore. I have two sons and a daughter, and one doesn't have any kids, and the other two they both have just 2 kids. You know, they don't need the big old 5-6 bedroom houses anymore. So, you know, we need to really focus. That's why I'm so proud of this work that my colleagues have, you know, worked on so hard, because we're now going to be able to address these issues that we're facing now with all the displacement that's going on, and we have the opportunity to integrate this city. Put aside all the hate and discrimination that I grew up with here in Austin. You know, now we have an opportunity that we can have a diverse, mixed income, mixed race city where everyone can live together in all parts of the city and not be excluded just to one section of the town. So I want to say thank you to my colleagues.
Thank you. Councilmember Flanagan.
So I want to thank everyone on this dais for all this really hard work and very difficult debate and sometimes contentious debate. But I think we managed to do it pretty respectfully and thoughtfully, even where there was disagreement. And I want to thank Councilmembers Harper, Madison, Renteria, and Kitchen for working so hard as a group to put out these documents that we've done on the message board over the last couple of weeks. I'm really excited by what we're doing here. Every city in America is facing a housing crisis, as the Mayor Pro Tem said. And we're not going to address it by not doing as much as other cities are doing. You know, some people have talked about Minneapolis and things they've done in their comp plan, but they have not done it in their zoning code. Right? We're actually ahead of the game there, and I don't think Spencer Cronk came here to do less than Minneapolis does. I mean, it's time to go big, and I think that's where we're headed. We are not doing everything I wanted to do in this document, but we're definitely doing a lot more than we do now. And I am encouraged and excited, and I hope that we can continue dialogue and not allow some folks in the community to foment some very negative emotions that we know sometimes can bubble right under the surface. So I'm really excited. I'm excited to have this process initiated, and I'm really, really looking forward to nailing down the details when this comes back in the fall.
Councilmember Tovo.
Yeah, I want to add my thanks to all of my colleagues. This has really been a pretty intense couple of weeks and a couple very long days. And I agree, Councilmember Flanagan, I think we've done a really good job of disagreeing respectfully for the most part. And I think that represents a very good foundation. And I just want to also thank our staff, those of you out here, but also our council staff who have worked really hard. I want to just make a few quick remarks, and also just to preface my remarks by saying that I have been a consistent supporter of the Land Development Code. I supported revising it when I voted for the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan, directing that outcome, when I voted with the at-large council on what we then called the 2.5 version, which was supposed to be a balance between a clean sweep and kind of minor tweaking. When I voted along with the first 10-1 council to reaffirm that code rewrite direction, and when I voted for the additional funding for the Code Next consultants. I believe that we need to revise our land development code. My vote tonight doesn't discount that. But I will say, I really had hoped that with this direction we could craft a document and a set of directions that I could support. And again, while I agree that we need to revise our land development code, and I agree with a whole lot of what's in this direction, there are just some elements in here that cause me a lot of concern, all of which I've mentioned along the way. The transition zones, the way in which the transition zones are really cutting into the interior of the neighborhood, the fact that we don't have a firm tie on those increased entitlements to affordable housing contributions, and several other elements. That being said, when this comes back to us, I'm going to work just as hard as I did last time to propose amendments and to collaborate with my colleagues to see if we can get to a place with a code and a mapping that I think represents a balanced approach and also achieves our goals of Imagine Austin to increase the density along the corridors and the activity centers. I will say I think that we have an opportunity with this process to build back some of the trust with the public. It was not a small group of people who were concerned about Code Next. It was a large group. I don't think they were misinformed. I believe a lot of people really understood well what they were responding to in the countless public meetings that were crowded with people who had never paid attention to land use issues before Code Next brought forward a map that was really dramatically different from the planning efforts that had been done in the past. And so I regret that we're not providing direction that I think is a little more balanced and more responsive to those concerns. But I look forward to continuing to work when this comes back to see if we can get to that place.
I guess I'd like to thank the manager for moving forward with our request that he give us a process to get this up and down and to move the city forward. I appreciate the 5 questions he gave to us. I thought, in looking at them, I think they were the right 5 questions to get the council to actually commit and make decisions and make choices and set priorities. Those are difficult things to do. And I think one of the reasons why the process didn't work in the past is because that's something we had not done. And we've done that now. I would urge to the manager, I think a lot of stuff we've asked for and the timing we've asked for, it's going to be difficult to do with the resources that exist and the hands, the number of hands that are present. And I want to make sure that the manager comes back to the council to ask for whatever resources or assistance or help or whatever is necessary to be able to do this. And I anticipate that's something we're going to have to address certainly during the budget session, but maybe even before then. And I would urge the manager to come back to make sure that he gets everything that staff needs in order to be able to do this. I'd point out in particular the issue of calibration. So much of what we're doing in here is going to require this to be calibrated correctly, because so much of what we're doing here ties to affordability, economically viable affordability and bonus programs. So I urge real careful consideration on that and making sure that if we need additional expertise permanently on staff on that issue, let's get that, or whatever we need to make that happen. I think that this is a really good balance, this document, and I thank my colleagues for working through this. This was not easy, and I think we got through it really well. I think it does reflect the general will of our community. And I think that there are a lot of really key elements in this that are really important. I think the community wanted us to create greater density and housing supply along the corridors and the activity centers across the city. This does that. It allows us the use of throughout the city of auxiliary dwelling units, ADUs, like granny flats and garage apartments, to better help people age in place and make ADU construction and use easier and less expensive. It directs the staff and the manager to give us more duplexes and triplexes and quads and more areas at the perimeter of neighborhoods, serving as the transitions from that density on the corridors and centers. It requires that most of the neighborhoods remain untouched from that transition area, and that the transition areas are only 2 up to generally no more than 5 lots deep. And even that is based on defined, context-sensitive, and site-specific criteria. And we only give new entitlements as economically viable and only where it expands new affordable housing opportunities or provides a substantial community benefit. It incentivizes the preservation of existing homes to discourage the tearing down of single-family homes and their replacement with larger, more expensive single-family homes. It helps incentivize walkable communities and decrease the cost of required cost of housing by generally eliminating parking requirements, but only in areas that are close to transit, and even still requiring ADA disability parking, even if other parking is not required. It ties to the strategic housing blueprint, Imagine Austin strategic plan, and the strategic mobility plan. It recognizes the importance of our environmental protections and insists that they be implemented in a way that still allows for us to increase our housing supply. And finally, I would just note that it requires a new land development code that reduces impervious cover citywide, improves water quality citywide, and reduces flood risk citywide. I recognize that there are things that everybody on this dais probably would change about this document. And certainly I'm getting emails now from people pulling every which way on this, but I just think that this is really good work. Their community will have months to be able to debate whatever it is that comes back. We're going to have lots of opportunities to change it and refine it, and I'm sure that we will. But I'm proud of the work that we've done here today. With that, we ready to take a vote? Those in favor of the direction, please raise your hand. Those opposed, Poole, Tovo, and Alter voting no. The others voting aye. Passes 8-3. And here at 10:38, this meeting is adjourned.
I go through this every night. It doesn't hurt to set aside something meaning in its entirety, just like it used to be. Misunderstood most of